Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. We are going to go ahead and call our meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for us.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
Here with bells on.
Mr. Stevens, Mr. Stevens, Miss Davis,
Here.
Dr. Yeager,
Here.
Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Mr. Worthy,
Here.
Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Knotts,
Here.
and just for the record, Dr. Maddox.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have a quorum.
There's Antoine.
Mr. Stevens is now here.
Okay. Thank you. We'll move forward with item number 2, which is to amend or adopt the agenda. The floor is open for motions.
I move that we adopt the agenda as written.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Davis made the motion, Dr. Yeager second. Are there any questions or discussion? Okay, Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for all of those that are in favor of adopting the current agenda.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Miss Davis,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Mr. Worthy,
Yes.
Dr. Gant,
Yes.
Dr. Knotts,
Yes.
and Dr. Maddox.
Okay, thank you. That motion carries, and so we'll move forward with the agenda that's printed before us. The next item on our agenda is our norms discussion. I do want to thank everybody for coming back tonight. Thank you to Dr. King and Ms. Rain for facilitating our conversation. I'm continuing to facilitate our conversation tonight, and so I'm going to turn the floor over to them so that we can pick up where we left off.
All right, greetings all, Chairman Gant, members of the board, Superintendent Dr. Thomas, Council Pruitt, as well as any guests. We're back, happy to be back. Who knows, maybe we finish early this evening, who knows? Good work last night. You were able to walk through a couple of extensive norms, so we're going to continue that in that same spirit. So I'm going to ask Julie to remind you of your outcome as far as the review analysis, because that was the driver behind how we started last night. And so we just want to remind you that you've completed 2, and then let you know what your results indicated, and then determine how you want to start tonight based on what you feel your needs are. And we'll just dive in from there, Julie.
All right, thank you, Sam. So we've got board meetings done and then stakeholder concerns. And I think we've covered a good bit of board emails under communications as well. The next big item was the LSGTs and conducting town halls. Now, we made conducting town halls separate, but if we want to keep it under communications, that's fine. So what we thought was we'd get your feedback on if you wanted to just go down and finish all the communications, starting with LSGTs, and loop in town halls under that, or if you want to do town halls separately. So thoughts on that? So we'll know how you want to proceed.
Well, you mentioned that getting some feedback here. But I was saying, Julie, you mentioned that with town halls that we cover some information on the communications, and perhaps that's what it needs to be. If we have covered that, we need to move on.
Yeah, and Sam and I aren't sure the purpose of the conducting town halls as a norm, and kind of wanted to get your feedback on what has been issues in the past, or if there's issues going forward, or your concerns, or if there's a plan in place for having those. So we just don't know the background on that one, but it seemed like it was a high priority.
Well, I mean, I think it was because if I give a short background, as far as I know that Tawana held a town hall meeting with the county commission, the county commissioner in her district, and I happened to be there as well, and so that was held without too much discussion. I don't know how many other board members knew about it. I had one earlier in the year, I think in January, right? Yeah. And, but anyway, I had worked with Dr. Thomas and her and the PR person to kind of refine with the language of the invitation. And then it was sent out to, notice of that was sent out to parents and staff of the schools that that either I represent, that's in my district, or high school and middle school that my elementary schools feed into. And so one of the concerns that a board member raised is the legality, and I don't want to speak for her, but it's the legality of using, even though it technically didn't cost any money, but using central office staff to promote a single board member's political focus or whatever. And so that's kind of where we left it. But then I think it was talking with y'all a few months ago, you and Dr. King, that the discussion came, well, what we want to do, if we're going to do something like that, then we need to have some type of structure where all board members are credited with doing outreach such as that, and that we need to do it in an expeditious way so that we don't take up repeated uses of school district email and staffing time. And so I feel very strongly that and based on the reception that I got and what I've gotten since, that this is something that the public would really appreciate and would put the board members more in out there, because one of the main complaints has been of board members, and I think we've all had this, is that we don't see you in the school. So it's kind of like all we do is see you at meetings and you make these decisions, but you don't care what you're not soliciting or getting feedback. And the only purpose for that particular town hall that I had was to solicit feedback on certain topics. Now, I will say before I stop, we did have, the Government Relations Committee, we did have a legislative forum 2 years ago that we presented and got feedback on our legislative agenda. But that didn't seem to raise the concern, at least with a board member or so in the same way. So that's the history of it. I feel very strongly that, I've already been asked to do it again, and I've written back and said, based on the discussions that we had with you, Julie, and with Dr. King, that this is going to become a discussion of a norm. So I'm not responding to your request right now for me to have another one, because this is going to be a board response.
Yeah, I'd like to say something, a couple of things here. Number one, I believe we have a policy that would address part of our town hall meetings, but I can't recall the code section right now. Now, having said that, Julie, I can't recall what meeting it was in, not last night. Earlier, you made a statement about being careful in terms of board members rather, calling town hall meetings. If I can jog your memory on that, but before I finish talking here, also a comment that you made, Greg, that, constituents will say that, well, I don't ever see you all in the schools and blah, blah, blah. But I don't know how we're going to ever solve this. And in fact, we probably can't solve it because all boards have this problem. Constituents, they don't understand our role as board members. They think that we just get up, decide to go out to Clark Central or Apps Road or wherever. And that's not the way it's supposed to go. Hopefully, since all of this is happening here, hopefully some of them will get the message, what our role is, that we can't just do that. Those are operational things, and that was the superintendent thing. But back to you, Julie, do you recall making that comment about being careful and having calling town hall meetings?
Yes, as a best practice, you want to make sure that it's systemic and it's strategic and it's equitable for all board members. So, when you, as an individual board member, go out and declare a town hall, you don't really always have the necessary information to answer questions of your constituents. That's the staff's role, right? So it does take sometimes an enormous amount of planning on the staff's part to fulfill those. And if there's only 3 of y'all doing these out of the 9, that's not a very proactive and strategic thing to do as a district. So maybe you plan quarterly meetings or, monthly meetings or every other month in different parts of your areas. And you make sure if you're going to go to, say, a Rotary meeting and they want you to speak on something and it's just you because you're a member, then let's have the staff provide all the board members with a PowerPoint and talking points to go out and make a presentation. You might not be able to answer all the questions, and you can certainly say, I don't know the answer, but I can get back to you on that. You just need to have a strategic communications plan that also envelops town halls under it, because it sounds like this is a need of your community, a complaint that y'all might be getting.
One of the concerns I had, not even a concern, well, it's a concern, is how to do that in a way that is sustainable and manageable for district staff. So I attended with Mr. Davis, and it was a good session. But then they were asking at one point if he could do that monthly. And if that's happening times 9, I can't sustain that. My other concern is that finding a way to do it around maybe a topic or somehow organizing and structuring it such that it's not just an opportunity for people to complain about whatever they're dissatisfied about. Because again, the ability to sustain that as district staff, if you are a board member of 1 and you're doing that, but if I have to do that every week, it takes a toll on you. And it's difficult to always be in a position of defense. It's exhausting. And so trying to see how, and we had talked at some point about, could we do it like by quadrants, or could we do it, just trying to find a way and not being one to complain. I mean, work is nothing that I'm intimidated by, and I actually enjoy, but you do board meetings times 2 a month, and then you do committee meetings times 4 a month. And then you add in other boards and commitments, and then you do a town hall, even if we're talking about every other month, but you do that with 4 people, just how do we do that in a way where we can sustain the support that's needed from the district office, unless it's something that we're not asked to be a part of. If there's a way that board members want to capture feedback and share that back with us, or as you said, if there are things we can provide presentation materials on, and then there are questions, but just trying to see how the burden is not overwhelming for district staff. And I say district staff, but really me. And I usually don't talk from a selfish perspective, but that's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And
Physically and emotionally, it's a lot.
because they're always at night or on the
Mhm.
weekends. And
Mhm.
having worked in a school system and in senior staff, we had 9 board members at the time, and we got called to these all the time. And it's not always an effective use of time, for sure. And the most effective ones are the ones that center around a certain topic. Like Greg mentioned, the legislative priorities or agendas. During the session, if there's big cuts coming to education, it's great to have a town hall to educate your staff, your constituents, to reach out to our elected officials to lobby against or for certain laws that were pending. Those are very effective. So, going forward, how do you guys want to handle this? Because it shouldn't be that only certain board members get the support of the staff, and with 9 board members, that's a lot. That's a lot of resources throughout the year.
Julie, I'd like to piggyback on something that Dr. Thomas said, and she did a good job in explaining things there. One thing she said is just lit a bulb up in my head in terms of, there would be people that want to have town hall meetings without the superintendent's staff, etc. And when you get there, of course, you may do the agenda prior to that, but they get to asking questions about personnel. They get to asking questions about, well, let me just put it this way in one package there, operational kinds of things. That's not our role. And I don't care what you say to some of these constituents, and then there's some, they'll get angry with you. I said, well, that's just the way it is. I know when I was president, we had a big town hall meeting right there at H.T. Edwards, but we had a hot and heavy situation going on. It was a rape situation at Cedar Shoals High School. I won't get into the details of it, but I had constituents calling me, etc., and said, "You, the president, I think that you need to do something about this, because not this community going to blow apart." Well, I think we had a called meeting, and the first thing 2 board members said, "Wait a minute, we're always talking about micromanaging. Look at this." I said, "Oh, wait a minute now, hold on." We're going to be talking about policies, okay? And the Board of Education, we deal with policies. Long story short, we had over 200 people there, okay? And when it started now, because like I said, it was a heated situation, but we accomplished some things that night. Of course, now some people called at me on the way out after the meeting, and I just had to walk away from one guy because they don't understand, and they don't want to understand in terms of our role versus the superintendent role. Now, having said all of that, if I'm going to attend a town hall meeting, I would not do it without the superintendent being there or some of the staff members.
Can I share something? I think Dr. Yeager, maybe this was early last year, and myself, along with 2 other commissioners, had like a town hall And I think it was more similar to, I mean, I think we did share some information. It was more just like a summary of the things that were going on, or that had occurred. But I felt like it felt like a listening session. So what I wanted to say is I like the idea of a listening session. It didn't seem like that adds any additional burden or extra work to the staff. I also think this might be one of those norms that we can talk about a little bit more, maybe, at one of our future work sessions. I don't see this as an area that has caused problems for the board. Like when we talk about like areas of governance, that's my opinion. And so I would support a listening session. I don't see these, this was not one of the ones that I saw as like critical, but I do understand that it made it to the list. So maybe other people saw it as critical to our functioning.
I'm not hearing so much critical for the board. The board still shows up and does what they do. The critical thing that happened with the one that Greg talked about in particular was the staff was involved in sending emails out to all of the parents in those schools. And then I don't know if there's any follow-up on any of that stuff or not, but Dr. Thomas just spoke to the impact on staff. So it's the balance here in terms of our needs, our wants versus what the district has capacity to support in one sense. And I think the other thing that popped into my mind, I don't think it was right around an election time, but because we're in that period now, in that mode of elections and stuff, if board members start having town halls in their districts or in their areas, and you've got opposition, then is the school district obligated to give equal time to opponents? And I don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but those were the thoughts that came into my mind when we had letters going to parents. And I found out about Greg's town hall, and I think I was in a doctor's office or a lawyer's office, and a parent said to me, "Oh, I got a letter about your town hall tonight." And I said, "I'm not aware of a town hall tonight." And so they said, "Oh yes, it went out this morning." And I'm like, "Okay, so there's a town hall." But I don't know anything about it, so it's fine. And so the fact that I didn't know about it isn't as troubling as that every parent, I think it was over 1,300 parents got letters, or I don't remember how many people received letters. And then I'm not sure what the turnout was for that town hall. And the parents' comment to me was, I'm sifting through all of these things that I must do from the school. And then I get this notification of a town hall. And I said, well, it's how are you gonna find out about it? Right. And so that's what prompted me to even have a conversation about this, is because I do not understand, if we don't have a policy of sending emails to parents about board members' individual town hall meetings, then why do we do that? If a board member has no power, no authority other than that is granted by the full board, I'm just having trouble understanding how we make these decisions.
Okay, so that's probably what I'm hearing, is that that's probably the reason that it's on the list, is that there might be some, I guess, discrepancy as to when and if and how you do town halls. So I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. I hope you can hear me okay. But so you need to probably consider, number one, do you need to establish some high level bullets around this? Because you got some multiple pieces to it. Because number one, your superintendent might have a process where you all are going to begin to engage the public in a different way. I heard you all talking about that too. So sometimes there are public forums or community forums that's facilitated by the superintendent and, along with the board in various, for the lack of a better way to say it, quadrants of your district. But when I say your district, I mean your school system, not a district represented by an individual board member. However, you might feel a need or responsibility as a board member that you have some accountability to do town halls. So we need to know where you stand on that. And the other piece, I think one of you raised it earlier, would be, what do you have in policy right now that might create some requirements around how you are doing this now. And do we need to just do a glimpse of that? I saw some entering in the chat of some policies that might relate to this, because you're going to have to get some standards around it to determine. If you got 9 board members, are you going to develop a norm that says board members have the opportunity if they choose, and that it's a limit of 2 per year, 1 each semester? Or will it be a merging of different geographical areas where several board members can join on, and then it's all of your communities that come together? Although each board member represents all of the children. Remember, we told you that best practice wise, when you run and you're elected. So you need to consider all of these, because we have seen, Julie and I have seen districts where they do town halls based on the area in which the board member represents. However, there is some structure around how they do it, so to try to get some standardization around having too many, so that you don't overtax the superintendent and the administration. And it has to be linked to certain topics that you were discussing, so that it's not a, not a gripe session. So that's why you have some structure around it. So number one, and then I heard someone say that this is not you don't think it's a problem. So if it's not, you might want to push back the challenge whether you need a norm or not, or whether you just need to review your policy.
I guess I would like to make a suggestion to piggyback on what Lakeisha is saying, is that since I'm kind of pushing forward on this, I have not written a draft of even what I'm thinking about. And I know, so I feel like I need to do that. And so I think it's something that it's certainly not going to come up anytime soon. So with the permission of the board, if I can, put up a draft in the next few weeks and just kind of put that out there, and we may not even discuss it until the first of the year, but that way we can move on to another topic that perhaps we already have a draft of, and we can go ahead and complete tonight.
Okay, I like what you said, Greg, because this could take an hour and then we hadn't gotten anywhere. But let me say this before we move on. I mentioned that there's something in the policy pertaining to town hall meetings, and I couldn't recall the code section, but I noticed that Patricia put in the chat that it was the same policy that I talked about last night, policy BAB. So what you said a few minutes ago, Greg, that's a great idea. If you want to put something in writing, or draft something there, and then of course at the same time review the policy, and let's take a look at this at a work session, because I can see right now this is going to be a lengthy discussion, and when you finish up, we hadn't established one bullet, hadn't established anything.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I also like that option. And as you're writing, just consider how the feedback process will work, because I don't want constituents to feel like they've come and shared information or concerns and there was like no loop back. So how we work that, and that's something we can also talk together about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that sounds good. That was a good discussion. And
I feel the same way, if I can push forward, Julie, about the LSGTs, because we really don't even have a policy about LSGT.
yeah, I read your policy today, and it doesn't really say a whole lot.
No.
It's just that you have LSGTs. And our question, Sam and my question was, how's it working now? Why do you need a norm for this? Because they are stakeholders as well. So is there a different lineage that they deserve something different in terms of a norm?
Well, what happens is that from my point of view, I have gone to LSGT trainings done by, gosh, I wish I could.
James Ballerman.
No, this was, who's the one for the, she's over the foothills, but she does.
Sherry Sherman.
Thank you. I've gone to workshops with her, and she recommended board members, attend kind of at random, and and divide among themselves, but actually attend LSGT meetings. And that has not been something that in this district has been encouraged. So that's a confusion in my mind in terms of what she's saying as someone who was head deep in LSGT training and operations and talked to a lot of boards versus the tradition that we've had here. So, so again, that's why I think that to me, the norms come after you have the policy, and I don't think we don't quite have the relationship between the board and the LSGT structure. I don't think we're clear, even in terms of a policy perspective. Or do we have any role at all, type thing? At the same time, they were kind of a creation of the school board because we voted on the policy. I mean, on the charter system. So,
right, and we were a charter system as well early on, and we did come up with a schedule of board members visiting as an observer, each of the different schools LSGT's meeting. And then when we had spotlights, which we would do fairly frequently throughout the year of different schools, what's happening at Fifth Avenue Elementary, the LSGT members would come and present along with the staff. And so, we got to have a lot of interaction and dialogue with them there as well. So, I mean, I understand the concern.
So what did your district have a policy in terms of the relationship between the board and the LSGT or not?
No. What we did, it really wasn't a policy, it was a procedure. And it really, because when you have local school governance teams, what are they responsible for making decisions on? What is the board responsible for making decisions on? And then what is the superintendent responsible for? Because when it comes to hiring principals, the LSGTs had control of, the interview process. They were involved in it, but ultimately it went up to the superintendent to make that decision. So we had to delineate what the board does, what they do. And we had a system-wide governance team of members from each of those schools that would meet quarterly to talk about issues and systemic things. What did they make decisions on? So it was just a 4-quadrant. It wasn't a policy, but it really laid out the procedures, and it was very helpful, especially for new members coming on to LSGTs. It's a lot to learn.
All of those things Julie's talking about are laid out in your charter system contract with the state.
Yes.
So if you haven't read that, you need to read that. I think what you're talking about is more just of, so all of the who makes what decision and how do those recommendations get communicated. We have all that in our contract.
I figured.
I think
that charter is application is very detailed.
Right. So
that being the case, Mike, why did we have such an issue around year before last about the funding of the innovative grants, and how was the money spent? Was it spent wisely? We had $500,000 that I believe that not a single board member really understood, and we had divisions among us on that budget, but I don't think anyone actually knew, the financial piece of the LSGT for that particular year's budget. So
that grant.
So what I heard in that discussion, Greg, and so again, I think it's important to allow other opinions to be heard too. But I think what I heard was when it was presented to us to take the money from the LSGTs, that was presented as the decision of the principals. They agreed, they gave up the money because they didn't have innovation for it. The board accepted that report from the superintendent. The backlash came after it was known that that money was pulled back into general funds. So again, I think we have to follow this logical process of how did that controversy even arise? And it arose because the LSGTs didn't want the money to be turned back into the district for the general fund. They wanted that money instead to be set aside. So I don't know how the board could have intervened in that until that voice was heard. And
So
I think
You're
it's
right.
by nature to be noise.
If I can just provide some little additional insight, and you're right, Ms. Davis. So part of the issue has been that language and terminology used, and this is something that Mr. Harris is looking to improve upon in his role. But even from when I was principal, and that's only been 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, we were told that those funds needed to be used for something, again, innovative and creative. When
Right.
realistically, the purpose of charters are to increase student achievement. And people were looking for something like so out of the box and really different, thinking that the expectation was that you come up with something that no one else has ever done or ever thought about. And so principals were looking for ways to spend those funds. And then when you looked at ways to impact student achievement, many of us, not all, but many of us received a very sizable amount of Title I funds. That was before we went to Fund 150. So you had schools getting $100, $150, $200,000 a year in Title I funds. So when you were looking for ways to improve student achievement, and you talk about hiring staff to be academic interventionists and after school tutors and all of those things, at some point you can only purchase so many people and it not be an abundance of people. And it's like, okay, you got people, you don't have space. Where are you going to put them? You don't have room. You don't have pullout rooms. So principals were feeling as if we had sufficient funds, most of us, again, not all, to help meet the remediation and acceleration needs of our students by using Title I dollars. So when it came up and schools were like, I can't think of anything creative. What can I do? Oh, I'll go build a walking track. I'll go do this. And so principals were struggling even when we were working with James on how to spend the money. So when the request came to take a percentage of those funds to support our social emotional learning, the majority of principals were okay with that because they recognized that most of our academic instructional needs were being met through other funding sources. But then when the community learned of that, that's when a lot of the backlash occurred. Principals had agreed, we were asked, we were given input. But that's just an example of, people getting parts of and then it blows up because like we see with a lot of this communication, and this is unfortunate, and I don't know how you fix this with norms, but once certain members of the community latch on to any particular issue, they get the ears of those who vote, and it can blow up without it always being an accurate picture of what's actually taking place.
I really appreciate that clarification. And again, the language matters. I think that's really important. And I thought the one takeaway the board got out of this whole exchange was we needed to develop a way to have access and communicate with the LSGTs on some level. But again, we still have to be mindful of our governance role and their roles and the superintendent's role. So I think everything that we need to consider and looking for some, I guess, meaningful way, and I don't know what board members want in terms of a relationship with the LSGTs, but that was a topic that we were going to have for discussion at some point, and I think it's still a topic for discussion. I don't know that it's necessarily a norm, but it is almost like we finally came to an agreement of how we interact with the Career Academy board, and so we were able to work that out. And so I'm not sure that working with the LSGTs is radically different because the Career Academy isn't even a school, it's a program.
Let me say, piggyback on what Dr. Thomas said. You said that very well. It comes down to something this simple. I experienced the same thing that you experienced when I was a principal, Dr. Thomas. You listen to this closely. It's very simple. You use it or you lose it. And see, that's what happened with some of those LSGT teams, and it happens with Title I funds, a school getting $200,000, et cetera. Then let's say April or even May, you get just a pile of purchase orders. I cut that out because see, you just spending money just because you knowing that you got to spend it. You have to spend money wisely, as it was said earlier, to increase student achievement. So you said that very well, Dr. Thomas, you know, and that's what happened to some of those LSGT teams. They had money that they didn't spend. You either spend it, or you either use it, or you lose it.
And that's
Can I-
what changed. So
Sorry, can
they
I
don't
just,
spend it or lose it. Now it becomes a rollover fund for them, and that was what they were looking for.
I just wanted to add one thing, and I agree with what Dr. Thomas said about the principals agreeing and the difficulty coming up with innovation. Because I was on an LSGT around that time, I think part of the problem was also the fact that LSGTs weren't exactly sure how they were supposed to function. And I think some of the backlash came not just from people in the community, but from people on LSGTs because they felt like they should have had some say in whether or not they wanted to have that money or not. And so, and I don't think that's necessarily anybody's fault. I think it was just the LSGTs weren't sure how much say they should have, what they should be involved in. And so the decision was made by the principals. And so I think some of the people on the LSGTs felt like they had not been heard or that they had not weighed in on that. And I think we are, as Dr. Thomas put in the chat, that we're trying to improve the way that LSGTs function and the way that they, what they can do and how they can best be used. So I think a lot of that comes from the fact that there was just a lot of confusion, and hopefully that is going to be resolved. The other thing I was going to say, to Greg's point about us not knowing what the LSGTs spent their money on, I guess to me that's not as, that seems to be getting like more into the operations. If we are supposed to just approve like, oh, the LSGTs are going to get this amount of money, then I feel like we can't be that involved in like exactly what each school is spending their money on. But that's just my opinion.
Well, part of this is also
an
about control, folks. Before LSGT teams, you had school council, and I know Dr. King and also Julie can relate to this. And there were some people on these school council teams. They just in their heads that they could do things that they couldn't do. To give you an example, when it comes down to hiring, you know, they didn't have a role in that. But now let's say, for instance, hiring the principal. Yeah, and it was strictly in the law, and Mike probably can back me up on this. Yes, they went through a process and then said, okay, here's the person that we think should be the principal of this school. Give it to the superintendent. Superintendent had a choice. Put it in the trash can, then make his own decision or make our own decision. They have to understand the law on these things. You know, when the law came out with the LSGT teams from the General Assembly, I knew some of this was going to happen because we had experienced some of this with school council. Not to say that school council is pretty much identical to LSGT teams.
Right, but within the charter contracts, the LSGTs do have a larger role in decision making than the school councils did. But again, I don't know that we need to discuss that right now. I just think we have to keep.
Well, that's what I said a few minutes ago. It was not identical with them, you know, but some of it is about control.
And so for me, I think, I don't know if we need to discuss like how we communicate with the LSGTs, but I do think that we need to have a better understanding of what everybody's role is. And that is in the charter contract, and there is that matrix. But if there's some way that it intersects with what we do, I think we have to have a understanding of what everybody does.
So it sounds like now might not be the best time to develop a norm around how you communicate with them. Is that what I'm hearing? Because there needs to be more understanding and of roles and maybe updating a policy about it. Am I hearing you correctly?
That's what I'm thinking, Julie, and I'm going back to what you said a few minutes ago, and I got to go back and read that policy. According to what you're saying, that policy is not that strong. And of course, we probably need to take another look at that policy and enhance that policy. So I'm thinking the same thing that the suggestion that Greg made, you know, pertaining to what was that, Greg? Hot town hall meetings. That we need to table this, move on, and come back to it later.
Yeah, it also looks as if Dr. Thomas had a statement in the chat that said that she had some vehicle for doing a review of engaging the LSGT that will probably come back to the board for discussion at some point too. So sounds like you all are saying the same thing.
Okay, so I think we should move forward with communications and pull up the draft that y'all had been working on. I'll stop sharing this. I'm not sure if Lisa or Dr. Yeager has the version from last night that we started, plus the template of
Yeah, I can bring those up.
the sample norms and that we sent, as well as the communications draft.
Oops, sorry. I want. Communications. Okay.
All right, so this has been developed by a committee, I understand, correct?
And just so you know, while we were started to talk on this one yesterday, I was pasting in little bits of the one that you gave us into our document. So if the person who wrote this communication sees some interesting text, it's because I just pasted it in from just for discussion. We can delete it later if you don't like it, but I just took the bullets from this document and put them in this document.
Yeah, so if you scroll down on the GSBA document, I think that communication starts on like the third page. It's before social media communications. I think it's on the third page.
There's news media, social media,
Keep going.
communication with staff, communication among board members, communication, period.
Yeah. So a lot of boards start with just general communications that, you know, you want to be respectful, transparent, that sort of thing. And it looks like you've already got that nomenclature over here on your draft. So you've got your rationale. I guess y'all take a look at that and see how you feel about it. Yeah, so that's, looks like that. Starting to get into board and superintendent communications.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there.
this stuff goes further down,
Okay.
right? So we want to do this one first?
Yeah, just the general communications. See if that wording works for everyone. And there's one about social media there, but we typically have that broken out on its own.
So that was in this one here.
Right.
So you want to take that one out?
No, I mean, I'm just saying we can further expand on that later down when we talk about social media. That's just kind of a broad one.
And sometimes boards use that bullet when they don't pull out a separate norm on social media, sometimes as well. But you all may choose that you want a norm on social media. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's down there already.
Here you go. She knows these norms. Is everybody good with the general description of what the goal is and how you want to communicate with stakeholders?
So I'm trying to remember what who the team was that wrote these. They should be speaking up whether you want us to. Was it with John and Dr. Gant, or Dr. Knox and Dr. Gant, and who else? I'm trying to remember.
Mr. Stevens,
Mr. Stevens.
Dr. Knox, Dr. Thomas, and myself.
So should we try to incorporate these two from the other one into these, or do you want to leave them alone and just? I mean, they're kind of saying the same thing, although the timely part down here is not.
Mhm.
Maybe you could just add timely to the first part, transparent, ethical, effective, and timely communication, or
Mhm.
put it somewhere in there.
That works.
Yeah.
And then the numerical ones, we just have to determine how to get in the issue of confidentiality.
Mm.
Maybe it could just be its own.
That's what I was thinking, Dr. Dykeman. Maintaining confidentiality regarding, maybe starting, Dr. Yeager, with the maintaining confidentiality regarding sensitive matters. And it just, we have to find something for that sentence to end with, but. We just need an ending to it.
Do we need that sentence the governance team agrees to? Or not?
I think you'll have to change the way everything is phrased if you add that right there.
Yeah, I think that this is just the rationale, right? So I guess you don't need it if you're consistent with your other norms that you've already created. And then underneath, the governance team agrees to, because these three or four things are the rationale, correct?
Right.
Well, I'm wondering about that statement and refraining from discussing the intentions of fellow board members. Is that rationale or is that one of our norms? The maintain confidentiality is legal and a part of our policy. That one seems strange.
Yeah, I would personally put that as a norm,
Yeah.
as a to-do, and not necessarily as a rationale.
Mm.
Does that look good to everybody for rationale? Is it comprehensive enough?
So then is 4 a rationale or is it really a norm?
It's in policy and it's in our ethics, right?
Right, so is that more of a norm of expectation for how we conduct ourselves versus of why we do it?
We had it as a norm
It
personally.
seems more, I mean, looking at it there, sorry, Dr. Yeager. Cut it and save it, just paste it somewhere.
Go under superintendent, or does it go in the,
It can go under meetings if we didn't put it in there already.
what if we said a rationale would be respect? Something to do with respecting each other or respecting the team.
Mhm.
Something like that. Is that more rationale?
No, that's still, again, that's policy. So I'm not sure if policy becomes rationale, because that's something that's in our governance policy, right? Confidentiality regarding executive sensitive matters, which would be executive session, I would think. Or is that, did you take away executive sessions? What do we mean by sensitive matters?
Well, sometimes you're informed about a potential issue with the, let's say a principal, for instance, nothing's happened yet, but the superintendent let you know that this might be coming down the road. Even if you haven't had an executive session, you want to keep that confidential.
Well, that's why I'm asking, is that sensitive matters relative to executive session type topic?
A lot of times it is, yes. Most times.
Okay, I'm gonna leave that alone.
When I was thinking about rationale, I was thinking of these are explanations as to why we have to delineate these behaviors. So maybe the rationale could be something about how, yeah, good communication is important, or respect for team members and sensitive information is important, or something like that.
Yeah, to me, one of the rationales for y'all, I would think, and for most boards, is to strengthen your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Because good communication is the basis for everything, you know? And build mutual respect.
I like that.
Yeah, and then we can add in the confidentiality in later sections where it'll probably go in like every section, but.
And trust too, wouldn't it?
Yes. Builds.
I think open communication practices would be more descriptive for me.
That's a good one.
So those four look good in terms of rationale. It has moved, now that language has moved away from being norm style language. So
Mhm.
looks like you captured it.
I like it. All right, so do we want to start with superintendent and board communications? Looks like you've already got a jump start here.
And to give a little bit of background, I think, and Dr. Knox, Mr. Stevens, and Dr. Thomas, please correct me or add on. As we were creating these, the approach that we took was that we wanted to be able to operationalize what it looks like. And so we didn't want a person to be able to look at this and there to be a variety of different interpretations around, like what needed to happen or what counted as, effective communication. And so we wanted to sort of standardize the process so that board members would know really exactly what to do. But
So-
please share feedback because who knows, maybe we're, we're too specific. Maybe we need to, loosen some of the language. But that was just our general
No,
framework.
I mean, I personally like the idea of having it very clear. My question was with the first, the little letter I. Time-intensive requests from individuals will receive lower priority than time-intensive questions from the entire board. And I know at one point we had talked about how as a single board member, we shouldn't really be asking for, not that we can't ask questions, but that we shouldn't be asking the superintendent and staff to provide us with like a whole bunch of data or something. Like if there were a question that only one board member had, that maybe that wasn't necessarily the best use of their time. So I don't know whether that still holds or whether we should come up with a way to find out if other board members also want that information before asking the superintendent to provide us with a whole bunch of information that they need to go and get.
Dr. Dykeman, we did have a good bit of conversation around that. And I remember even talking about, even though we say we don't have to prioritize it, if there's a request from a board member to use Dr. Gant's often used phrase, there is a power differential there. And so you do naturally feel an obligation to try to get it done as quickly as possible. And I remember we had a conversation as a group. And maybe one of the things we want to think about is, does the request advance the work of the board and strategic plan? Or is it something that is solely for interest of just wanting to know, or is it something that ties to the actual, like how does it contribute to the work and the strategic plan of the district? That might be one way to address that.
Yeah, and I was just thinking in terms of your, feeling like you want to answer whatever questions are asked to you. I just wondered if there's a way that we can do some of this beforehand as a board and figure out, like, do other people have this question before even bringing the question to you? So then it would be like, there were 5 board members who were all interested in this question. I don't know if that's logistically possible, whether that's realistic, but
I will tell you what we did at the end of our meetings. We always had an item that said future business. So that's for future meetings, or, we need to have a discussion about this coming up in the next couple of months, blah, blah, blah. And if a board member wanted the staff to develop a report that isn't already developed, that would take a lot of time. And the superintendent would tell us, well, that we don't have that in the form you want it in, so it's going to take a considerable amount of time. Does the rest of the board want it? And then we would vote to say, if a majority of the board wanted it, then the staff would do it. So it was held, it was talked about during a meeting. So
Call that other business or new business? What did you call it?
future business.
Future business.
Mhm.
I really like that because again, it actually supports our policy that says no individual board member has authority except that conferred by the board.
Right.
Well, how does this fit in when there's something on the agenda and a board member has specific questions that we've been directed to let the superintendent know in advance what those questions are?
Mhm.
I'm just trying to figure out how I could see if you're asking, for, I'm looking for information on, I don't know, special education programming next week, and no one else has talked about it, then, that could be quite intensive. But if it's on the agenda
I don't see why it
as a
would be intense.
presentation, then, for a board member not to ask specific questions in advance, I think we're denying what we agreed to prior.
I think you said that it's on the agenda. So if it's on the agenda, the questions are welcomed, is what I understood.
Pulling a different report or creating a report is very different than asking questions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I guess
think we got,
I was talking about a couple different things, but with regard to what Greg was just talking about, I do think, of course, that everybody should get their questions answered. But I think what happens sometimes is if there's something on the agenda and I have 6 questions and you have 7 questions and Linda has 3 questions and somebody else has 4 questions, and then we all send them to Dr. Thomas, and then she's got 25 questions, some of which are redundant. I just wonder if we can sort of collate those questions first and then send her the questions so that she's not having to answer the same questions again, and there won't be so many emails for her to work through.
Well, we have tried. In fact, Carrie, you've been good about trying to set up Google Documents for that to happen. And some people respond and some people don't. But I mean, you've done that in the past.
Well, typically we have a norm. If you go up to section G, where on the GSBA document, there might be one in there. But typically, if a board member has a question, the superintendent responds and copies the rest of the board. Because if everybody's asking her the same questions, she can just email all of y'all without individually answering each one. You know what I mean?
it also sounds as if maybe it's 2 different things that we were talking about here. Because if you're talking about something that's on your agenda for a meeting, typically your superintendent is, and or her designee is going to expect questions from that. Because I got the understanding that this norm wasn't about something that's on the agenda. Am I wrong?
No, you're not.
No, I think there are 2 different. I think there are 2 different issues.
Okay. All right.
But I think multiple questions can fall under both of them.
Yeah, I understand. Yes. Dr. Thomas, any thoughts here? Because I think it needs to, because sometimes when the questions come in, I know that she'll have designees because it may be within certain categories and that kind of thing.
Right.
The other thing that I was going to mention was that somewhere in here, you might want to consider capturing where the board member is going to be receptive of the trusting the superintendent to respond in a way to indicate the kind of time it's going to take for that request. Usually that appears in here because different requests, if it's a report or something like that, she could tell you, the amount of time it's going to take for that and why. But, that's up to you how you capture this, but I think that you have to be mindful of that, especially when it could be multiple questions coming her way about something. And I'm not talking about agenda items, that's different. But I don't want to make this decision for you as a governance team, because this is about what you're comfortable with. So, Dr.
I
Thomas.
think there was, and you all would have to help me, Ms. Palmer can maybe help me. Didn't Dr. Means create some type of Google Doc for board members to post questions to sometime shortly before he left the district?
I remember a document that had future meeting topics, agenda topics to be explored.
We did have a Google Doc that we would ask questions on, and then there was a
There was a
space.
question Google Doc.
Yeah.
I recall that we would get questions given to us as members of cabinet based on what was posted by board members in that document. But I don't know how it was maintained or like what his procedure was for checking that, if that was something that, you know, like it would say on Wednesdays by 5. I don't know what that process was, but that's something that Ms. Palmer and I can discuss together.
I think, Dr. Thomas, my memory of that is that it worked in the beginning, but after a while, the responses, some of them were answered, some of them weren't, some of them were skipped, because we ended up with quite a lengthy list of questions. And so it may be kind of unwieldy, for your office to maintain that. That's just my gut reaction.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I think maybe if you thought about like what would work best for you, and then you can you can tell us. Because we could do something like that. I just don't know if that's what you would want or whether that would.
How do you make it sustainable, right?
You think that would be better?
Yeah, somebody's flashing it.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Keisha just put it in the Google Doc or in the chat. So I'm showing it. It's really long and unwieldy. Good grief.
It's a lot.
Yeah. That doesn't seem like a very.
Well, I think the benefit of it is that all the questions are in one place and they're not in multiple emails. But again, I think whatever works best for Dr. Thomas is how we want to.
Thank you for putting that there. There were only 12 pages of questions and very detailed answers.
I don't see the answers. I just see the questions.
I thought I saw answers on the.
I saw some answers.
Yeah, there's
Where-
some answers and there's
Oh, here.
Response,
Okay.
yeah.
You're right. Okay.
Wow.
I didn't know about this. I guess must have been before my time, maybe.
It
Yeah.
was.
I think we did it because we were new and we had a lot of questions. And so it seemed like at some point that this may have been a bit more efficient, but it was related to a similar conversation, I think. Like, how do we sort of streamline the questions that we have and be sure that we all have access to the answers?
Right, and that was over a couple month period of time. That wasn't all at the same time.
Right, that's right. So yeah, this wasn't like all one days of questions. I think we were, trying to definitely, call and make contact with individual questions that we had, but it was just around the time where it just seemed to be a lot of questions.
Okay.
Well, I
That's
definitely
interesting.
think that
It's a lot.
it is a lot, and a lot of this can be addressed in the meeting, right? So
Right.
I think it's a preference for the staff as to how best to handle that, because getting ready for a board meeting is very time consuming and taxing on the staff. So, you definitely want to work smart. And so I would lean to Dr. Thomas to see what she preferred.
Right. This is something I need to give some thought to. And trying to, I'll give some thought to it.
So there are these 6 bullets from the model document. Do we want to try to pull those in as sort of a preamble to these very detailed norms, or do you not want to do those because they're sort of self-evident, or do you see what I'm saying? So these are the 6 or 7 that are in the model. Do we want
I think I think I'm just getting overwhelmed with the how much wording there is in this one. I don't see how, I mean, like we've already talked about being, well, we talked about being respectful to each other. I don't know.
So you
I
don't feel
mean,
the need for these?
I don't, but maybe other people do.
Those are definitely norms because it goes back to your behavior. You know, being respectful to the staff, no surprises. If you have a concern or you're hearing something in community about a staff member, then you just talk to the superintendent about it privately.
Yeah, the only one I would ask to you to draw that I would draw your attention to is the one that says they would go to through the superintendent when wanting to communicate with staff. I only mention that because I think that came up with you all in terms of how you want to function. You know, what if you had a question that related to staff? Maybe you got a chief academic officer or something, and it was about student some academic area. Does your superintendent expect you to bring that to her, and then she'll pass it to her designee, or does your superintendent want you to go directly to that person? And if you don't land on some understanding with that, there could be confusion around that. Now, if that hadn't been a challenge for you, then you don't need to worry about it. Those other things, I get what you all are saying, but that one I just kind of jumped out because I thought I remembered something that you all might have mentioned about that.
It looks like they did address it with their draft that she's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, let me kind of give an example, Dr. King. It happened today, and I probably it was poor planning on my part. I grant you that, but I was at the Government Operations Committee meeting today because I'm a representative, and there was GSBA had a proposal, two proposals out there on finances that I had not a clue about how to vote. And so I contacted our CFO, and this was like an hour and a half before the meeting. And I contacted him and copied Dr. Thomas because, I mean, it was very specific questions about, you know, do we use SPLOS 5 years or 6 years, SPLOSes? And so, I mean, I probably broke the rule. If I can I guess I did break the rule, but I just, you know.
Yeah, you want to reach out to Dr. Thomas for that, and maybe she can answer it for you. If not, then she can get the answer from the CFO and give it to you.
But the problem is that, again, you know, I mean, circumstances, something I was gonna, the issue was gonna be this morning. And
Right.
so that was my problem. No, I don't know how Dr. Thomas felt about it, but I mean, it was a very detailed financial question.
Another, I don't want to say exception, but something to consider. So like our committee chairs have staff people that they work directly with in many of these capacities.
Right.
So Dr. Yeager, it's just an easy one, does policy, and Mr. Lawrence Harris is her policy person, and they meet weekly. In that case, to me, if she needed to ask a question about something they're working on with policy, I would not think that that would need to go through me to go to him, because that's kind of a ongoing two-way communication that's regular and consistent. And I don't know how to best capture those kinds of the differences between that type of communication versus a question about the individual's work that lies within their domain.
So non-committee work versus committee.
Right. That was simple. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome. That's a good point. And, you know, if you're comfortable with that, Dr. Thomas, you know, it's like they kind of have carte blanche with the person that they're working with during that process.
Whew.
I think that as a board member, so I don't want to put myself in Dr. Thomas's position as a board member. My passion could possibly overtake me, right? And so I think it's like a slippery slope. I think a default of, if it is a matter of simply copying the superintendent on that communication, I think that is much safer. It almost serves as a checks and balance, because like the times where, if I have overstepped, it certainly hasn't been because like I've like intentionally done it, but to have some type of checks and balance, I think would help so that we don't have a situation where, it goes back to discretion, right? And like the term of like what's appropriate is hard sometimes for a board member to tell when it's slipping over into, either operations or what have you. And for me as a board member, I think that that requires some discernment on my part. And I think it would be a little bit more difficult. Like if if I'm, I don't know, chair of, let's say some random superintendent evaluation. Well, no, maybe finance, where you're having to work directly with staff. I just think the safest thing to do is to simply go through or communicate with the superintendent, even if it's at the same time, so that so that I'm not even putting myself in a position that I unintentionally meant, I wasn't intending to put myself in that position, but I did.
So maybe copying the superintendent on those emails, but not having to necessarily go through me to make that contact, but at least I'm aware. So if it is something that's kind of iffy, I could reach out to the board member, or I could also reach out to the staff person and say, whoa, hold on. Let me intervene in this, or let's talk about this before it goes any further, or.
Well, yeah, and I wouldn't want anyone to be in a position. So for instance, when we met today for policy, we did a lot of good work. But one of the recommendations that, Dr. Yeager made was that we, schedule that. And we did, but I think the safest thing to do in that instance, as we did, was simply to include you on that communication, trying to schedule that. Just so, I don't know, again, that as a board member, I'm not put in a position where I didn't know, and it really was not any malintention, but I find myself like 3 or 4 conversations down the road at a place where the conversation has evolved, and you might not, or whoever's in this position may not have even been aware, not because of any malintention, but just I think it provides some type of checks and balances.
I would agree with you, Dr. Gant, about it is a slippery slope. I'm not a fan of board committees where staff is involved. I'm fine with board committees working on board work. It is a very slippery slope. And I think this is nice balance to keep the superintendent informed. I don't know that I would say given full reign.
I was going to question that too.
It just feels like, oh boy, I could really micromanage this finance director. It's just, I don't know. I know the essence of what you're saying, Tish, but
is discretion a better word there instead of permission?
Any work is not
I don't think so, but maybe I'm not using it.
That's what I'm hearing that's been happening. So.
may have an understanding from the superintendent to work with the staff member?
I can go with that.
with the superintendent? Do we want to put in there and copied on any communication, email communications?
Is that what you want, Dr. Thomas?
Sorry, I was muted.
All communication or key communication?
No,
I think what I heard from Dr. Gant was all, right? Dr. Gant, is that what you were
Yes.
saying?
Yes, but I was just saying like that was from the perspective of, as a board member. I think whatever is comfortable for you from that perspective, just going with that because it still gives us, we still have discretion to, to copy or not copy. I don't want to speak as if I'm in your position. I was just speaking more so from one of 9 board members, the perspective from this.
No, that's logical.
I guess the thing that concerns me is that Mr. Harris and I are working on the L&M policies and trying to set up the meeting. We've had like 6 or 8 emails back and forth. I mean, does Dr. Thomas want to know, Greg cannot meet with Lawrence on Monday, but he's available Wednesday. And then Lawrence says, well, I'm not available Wednesday, but what about Thursday? I mean, I don't know how much, I feel like my email account is going ballistic anyway, but Dr. Thomas,
Be careful.
Is that where we're going with that?
I mean, I get a lot of emails. I'm not going to deny that.
So is that what you want, all communication?
I hear you, Mr. Davis. I'm pondering.
Okay.
how do you avoid the surprises?
Yeah, and I think we can see how these norms work, right? And if it turns out that that doesn't make sense, then we can revisit it sometime later.
That's why you want to revisit them every year.
That allows us to assess, the effectiveness of it and how reasonable and realistic is it? Are we able to maintain it and that kind of thing?
Correct. So anything else with this particular norm? No.
The organization of this material drives me crazy, but I guess we can straighten that later, right?
Yeah.
It seems all jumbled to me.
Yeah, I can't edit in Google Doc very well.
No, I'm not faulting you. I'm just saying we got a lot of words to it and dots and numbers and indentions.
We can work on formatting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the content is there. I think Dr. Yeager's doing a great job of capturing what everyone's saying.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay. Moving on. Do you want to?
So do you want to start with staff next? If you feel like we've got everything we need for superintendent and board relations, communications?
I
Yeah,
thought we were talking about stuff.
I just want to be clear, and I'm getting confused. We may have covered this last night, but if there is a question that I have to the superintendent, not one that's involves a lot of research, but more of a, what's behind this or whatever. I can ask my question directly to the superintendent, and then if he or she feels like the response is appropriate for the rest of the board, then it will be her that will, or him, who will make that decision and
Correct.
to share it. Okay.
Or does it make sense to copy everybody on your question so that if we had the same question, we wouldn't ask it again in the time between you asking the question and her answering the question?
Yeah, typically, when we got our board packet, if someone had questions, they would send the superintendent the questions and copy the rest of us on it. Because 9 times out of 10, we all had the same questions, right?
Right.
So she would always reply all with her answers. Or say, I'll be sure to have a staff member there to address it.
So are we talking, so I put question marks here because I'm still trying to figure out, so there's different categories of questions, it sounded like, and I haven't captured that feeling, Kara, very well, I don't think. Are there different categories of questions? Is this one mostly talking about?
I mean,
board
I think there are
support?
different categories. One is like what Greg was just saying, if you have questions about something that is coming up on the agenda, so something in the board packet.
Okay.
And then the other one, the other category is maybe more under that like future business or something that somebody wants to know about that isn't necessarily related to an action item that we'll be taking a vote on at the next meeting. So I don't know if that falls under that idea of like future business or whether we want to put something different.
Find that, right? It's either on the agenda or it's future business, right? If it's
Yeah.
not that we've already brought up. I guess if it's something about something that happened in the past, that has its own place. I'm not sure where that goes.
Or we could even just do a binary, something that's on the current agenda or not.
Perfect.
Okay, what happens if in fact this happened recently where there was a topic that I felt strongly should be on the agenda. So I emailed Dr. Thomas, the president of the board, and the vice president of the board, since I knew they were going to meet on the agenda setting, the following week or something, and said, I would really like to see this topic discussed at some point, So I don't know if that was the right way of doing it, but I just, it was just something that had come up that I felt was worthy to be on the agenda at some point.
I know y'all have a policy on setting the
agenda
agenda.
setting.
Yeah. So I read that today. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with the process, but if, let's say, they didn't put it on the agenda, and if you had something at the end of the meeting called future business, you could bring it up and say, hey, I really feel like we need to discuss this. How does the rest of the board feel about it? And then it's determined when it will come onto the agenda in the future.
But adding items to the agenda, if it's the work session, is 7 days in advance. That's what the policy says. Now, if it's the regular board meeting, and if the item is sensitive, you can ask to amend the agenda that particular night. To give an example of that reopening of schools, we know that that's a very sensitive item. So if you didn't contact the superintendent prior to that, that's sensitive. But for the work session, it's 7 days in advance.
And what's on the work session is automatically on the regular board meeting, typically?
Normally, yes.
Normally. Unless y'all decide at the work session, oh, we need further study, so we're gonna delay this one a month or so. Okay.
Table it, yeah.
But what you were saying about future business, that would just always be an item on the agenda, and then people could, when you got to that section, talk about things that they were interested in talking about in more detail at a later
At a later
meeting.
date.
Right.
Mhm. And, you know, it typically didn't last very long. There might be a couple of ideas that got thrown out. But it was
the
good
board,
to have there just so that we can, you know, look future forward there.
yeah, as long
Yeah.
as there's clarity around board members understanding that that's not a way to get something that's on the agenda at the same,
Right.
not during the same night, that is something that you want everybody to consider for future reference. Then it works, but it, you know,
I do want to make sure that we're consistent with the policy that Patricia just wrote, just raised. And that is that outside that 7 days, a board member can propose an agenda item. And-
Outside that 7 days, you said, Greg,
Yes, yes.
proposing an agenda item for the work session.
Right.
Well, that's not what the policy said now. If we're gonna follow
She
policy,
just
we
read-
got to
she
follow
just read
policy. Why?
That's what she just put that on the screen. So any request from board members to have a presentation or discussion item considered for board work session must submit it to the superintendent 7 days prior to the work session.
And that's what I said.
He said,
But that's what I said, outside the 7 days. board
Well, I
members-
thought you were talking about beyond the 7 days. I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
misunderstood.
but I mean, like 9 days.
Well, I'm not interpreting that correctly. It says must, which would be the same as shall, which would be 7 days. If you're gonna get it on that agenda, that's what you have to do.
But I could do it 8 days ahead of time. That's what I'm saying.
I think this is the minimum, not
Oh,
the,
you mean, well, he said ahead. Well, that's fine, yeah, that's fine.
right, that's the minimum, not the max. I mean, I don't think we have to say it's not on the 7th day. This is,
Yeah.
I think
I thought Greg was talking about after the 7 days, but he said, before. If it's 9 days before, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that.
and I would put a norm then under your meetings. We could add that to that area about
Yeah.
agenda setting.
And this is for the work session specifically. This is not for the regular board meeting,
Well, then just
correct?
just have it work session. Because meetings is meetings and it includes both.
Okay. I still like this idea of so in the event, Greg, that you don't make the 7-day deadline before the work session, you could still put it on the future business agenda item. If you come to the work session and say, hey, I'd like us to think about this. I mean, that seems like at least it would get captured and you wouldn't have to remember to do it, 2 or 3
Yeah, I think
weeks
that's
later.
a great suggestion to have that at the end of each work session. Yeah, that's a great agenda item.
It worked well for us.
Yeah, because then you can at least get a sense of how other people are feeling about it without sending 52 emails.
Exactly.
And you, just to be clear, you said that this is something that the board takes action on, right? So as people are suggesting a new topic or something that they want to hear about, then the board would then take action on that.
We don't typically take action. We just kind of
Okay.
got an agreement that you could tell if nobody else wanted it or a majority didn't want it. You just talk about it. I mean, I'm not the lawyer, so I that's how we did it. We didn't take action. We didn't do an official vote.
I'm trying to determine whether we're doing some overlapping with what we did last night pertaining to a board member or board members having a question for the superintendent prior to the meeting. Something that is in the norm 3, I believe, or a board meeting norm that we put in last night. I'm just concerned about overlapping.
Right.
Yeah, I feel a little bit lost, but it could just be the hour. Like between like what is overlapping with meetings and then what part of this communication may even be overlapping with stakeholder concerns.
And sometimes you will kind of overlap in different areas just to restate it, and that's okay. But yeah, if you've already created something, you shouldn't change it. Just have it.
To me, it feels like in the one we did last night, we said what's up on the screen right now, questions should be submitted to the superintendent in advance if possible. And then I feel like what we were trying to do today is sort of talk about the best way to submit those questions, but maybe that's too specific. I don't know.
Wow.
I'm trying to get to, I think I understand, yeah, it might be my hour too, but we were talking about the no board action needed or just come to agreement. I don't know. Is that just a show of hands? Is it just based on the comments that people make? And is everybody required to comment? So let's talk about that no action or vote needed on an item for it to be moved to the agenda, because that's the piece that seems to still be kind of vague in my mind.
Well, we usually don't vote in the work sessions.
Well,
I mean, we kind of agree about what's consent.
I'm not sure that this is limited to work session. Is this only a work session future business item?
Yes.
You can't have future business on the regular board meeting?
That's not the way it's written.
Well, I'm just asking the question.
We did.
Because I thought I heard a meeting is a meeting.
We typically had it at our regular meeting, but we didn't always have a work session a week before. We did everything.
I thought when this was brought up, you were discussing regular meeting, and how it got moved to work session. That's the piece I'm not clear on, but I'm fine. And when we talk about no vote needed or action needed, how does the board indicate to the superintendent that this is a priority for the board?
Yeah,
but considering what Greg said, now we can vote in work session. We can do that. Mike, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, ask Mike.
That's right. Under Open Meetings Act, a meeting's a meeting. So you can vote if you want to. I would suggest this whole consensus thing probably is not going to work. If it's consensus, it would just be something put on the agenda through the normal process. This is probably going to be something more controversial and probably should be voted on so the superintendent knows exactly what's going on.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm fine with voting on it. I guess I thought it was a way to just bring something up, not necessarily something controversial, but because there isn't really ever a time for us to talk about what people are interested in talking about. But I don't mind voting for it, you know.
Yeah, even
if we have like an idea, like there's a document that Lisa just shared, Ms. Palmer and Dr. Thomas, and I can't remember how far it went as far as like the different topics that will be on the work session. And then I know we've had that before for I think almost like a whole semester or a year. And so I know everything is not planned though, the things that we're interested in. But I guess I'm getting confused, like what would be the difference between the future topics of interest and then the difference between simply at the regular board meeting, seeking to modify the agenda. Or thirdly, looking at the calendar for that entire year or however long the superintendent provides it and say, you know, this is going to be something that I'm interested in what or discipline, or I'm interested in recess. And can we add that here when you're talking about when we had the presentation on wellness or something like that?
Yeah, so typically, maybe at your summer retreat, you kind of plan we call them editorial calendars, essentially in the journalism business. But we're going to talk about this on this month, and so you kind of have an action plan for the year. But then things come up. So let's say 8 months ago, you're like, you know what, the census is coming up. What are we doing as a school district to encourage our parents to make sure they fill out the census? So do y'all want to have a presentation on that? Yeah, so 2 months down the road, this is our plan for how to communicate with families around the census. 'Cause that doesn't happen every year, right? So that's just one example.
So we have shared the work session presentations for the year. And then just like you just said, Julie, we recognize that there will be things that will come up that we will need to share. And some of the things we may have planned to share, we may take off, and especially in light of us having discussions about timeliness of meetings and trying to streamline how much time is spent in meetings. Usually there's certain things that are just covered at the same time every year. So we may do something on discipline around the time of the year that we do the student code of conduct, or there's some things that have to be presented annually to get contracts signed or things like that. So those items are set and already shared, but then we try to make sure we don't overburden that schedule so that the unexpecteds can be covered.
Because they always occur.
I guess my thought of how these things are different, and maybe it's just that I don't totally understand the agenda setting policy, but on the policy, it says that you must submit your request more than 7 days in advance so that it can be considered to be put on the agenda, but it doesn't necessarily say that it will be put on the agenda. And so if one person has something that they'd like to talk about, how does the board leadership who's setting the agenda know if other people are interested in learning about that too? And so this future business part, I was thinking as a way of somebody saying, hey, here's something I'd like to talk about, and other people being able to say, yes, I'm also interested in hearing about that, so that might carry more weight to be put on the agenda versus one person just saying, I'd like to talk about this. Is that what you see it used for?
Well, Carol, if you read that policy pertaining, I think it's policy BC, pertaining to adding things on the agenda, every board member, you have a right to do that.
But I don't think that's the way it's been. So that maybe is what the
well, I'm not talking about the way it's been. I'm talking about what the policy said, and that's what we need to do. We need to start following what's in the policy.
But it just says to be considered for the agenda. So it doesn't necessarily mean if I say I want to talk about something and I tell them 8 days in advance that that's going to go on the agenda.
Right. I do get your point, Carol, because I know we've had a few times where that may have come up as far as what goes on the agenda and what doesn't.
So maybe it's a question of the policy here.
Yeah, because right now, and maybe Dr. Maddox and Dr. Thomas can speak to this a little bit more, but when we've met, if it's been some type of request or something that we've just heard generally from, from others on the board, we'll just say, hey, this is this is something that's been brought up or whatever. But this is, there does need to be some clarity because we have had previously, I think we've had trouble figuring out exactly how things get on the agenda. Mm-hmm. And so, my default has been to try to route it actually back through the committees first, because that's the next, that's at least a group that can talk about, its relevance, like if it's policy related, or we had a question that was finance related, I think last year, where a member wanted to add something. So I definitely I understand the concern, like what specifically happens for something to be put on the agenda.
I feel like this is mainly a policy issue and not necessarily a norm, because it's not how you treat each other, right? It's not the process essentially. So that probably needs to go back to your committee to further flesh out. Just my thoughts.
I wrote it down. It's on my list. Policy
Of course
committee.
you did. Of course you did. You don't miss a thing. All right.
Can I wait till January?
Of course. So anything missing from this one?
I was just thinking, we don't get a lot, Dr. Gant, of when we come in, you and Dr. Maddox and I, to look at agenda items. A lot of the things are topics that, like Ms. Palmer and I bring to you, or, you know, things that we know are pending coming up, wanting to talk about the discipline report or something of that nature. But we do get occasionally requests for items to be covered. So I'm just trying to think about the frequency with which we get those requests. And so.
But I hear you saying all of the items that you have received to add to the agenda, they've been legitimate items.
The majority of them have, yes, sir.
Okay.
And that makes sense because I mean, that the frequency at which that happens should be minimal, because your agenda setting typically is driven by your strategic plan and your time frame for implementing certain action plans that are within certain segments of your strategic plan. So your superintendent will be bringing items that are aligned with that, which pretty much builds an agenda. But sometimes board members will have questions like what you're mentioning now, but it fits within some of those categories in your strategic plan also. So if it's been minimal, that makes sense, because it shouldn't be frequent that you're having to ask for things to go on the agenda that you feel are not being addressed, because it should be addressed through that process of aligning with your strategic plan.
I think it's probably, I mean, I believe that's been minimal, but I don't think it's always been consistent across the time that I've been on the board as to whether or not things definitely go on the agenda or whether that's the discretion of the agenda setting committee. And then, I mean, whether the entire board feels the same way. Because Mr. Worthy was just saying that his interpretation of this policy is that if you make a request more than 7 days, then it should go on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell you that a couple of superintendents ago, not the previous one, but the one before, that was not the way things operated, from my
Does it say
experience.
shall in the policy?
No, it doesn't. It says it'll be considered, but it doesn't say it definitely will.
Right.
And
It's
typically
been that way for the 8 years I've been on the board.
the
Well, that word "consider" bothers me, because if a board member make that request, and then of course, if it's not considered, what reason you going to give? That no, we can't put that on there because of whatever.
My experience has been no response whatsoever.
Why?
So again, that's why I'm saying the policy's there, but it's gonna have to be the will of the board to honor the policy.
Yeah.
But I don't know but the policy doesn't say what you should do. It says you should consider it, but it doesn't say how
But what
you
I'm
consider
saying, if it's
it.
not considered, what's going to happen? Well, I mean,
Right.
then you can bring it up in future business, because sometimes it's not an appropriate action item for the upcoming meeting. and it's up to the committee to decide, and that's usually the chair, the vice chair, the superintendent, and maybe some senior staff.
And I think that should be communicated too. So again, if we're saying
Absolutely.
consider, there should be some consequence to that, or
Sure.
at least some feedback on that.
Yeah, not this month, but maybe next month, or this
Or
agenda is
at least,
full. And we're not prepared to discuss this yet because we need to do some more research about whatever it is you're wanting.
yes, and acknowledge.
Mhm.
And right now the staff is working full throttle with getting schools reopened, and we just don't have the bandwidth to do it this month.
That's a
So,
good example, Julie.
you know, it's you got to trust your staff.
Yeah.
If they say it's not a good time, it's not a good time. They're the experts. You hire them, you hire the superintendent, and you know, when the superintendent makes a recommendation, you need to respect it because
Yeah.
you know, they're the experts.
And that's what I was talking about, that as long as an explanation, if you make a request to put something on the agenda, then of course that is not considered or not put on there, then you need to give some explanation for that.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah, no,
And that's what
I
Julie
agree
was
with
saying.
you. I just want to make sure we all have the same expectation.
Right.
Right.
Yes, it definitely need to be communicated too as to why
Yes.
won't make it. So maybe that could be a norm, that you communicate that.
Mhm.
It's communicated to you by the staff, superintendent. Either the superintendent or the board chair.
So are norms usually this detailed?
No. I mean, everybody's different, but the ones you see on the right-hand side from GSBA, those are typical norms. It's general, it's to the point, and it doesn't have a whole lot of process in it. It's just, this is how we're doing it. It's just straightforward. But some boards like to give a lot more detail because they need it, and that's fine.
I just hope not all. I hope all our norms are not so wordy, because
Yeah, I don't want to overwhelm you, you know. I mean, I want these to be something that you can do a quick reference and, you know, understand, and they're all in one place. Typically, it's one document. And I know you've got several different documents because you had different committees working on it. And maybe the ultimate goal is to streamline it into one document.
because what we've done is that we've been trying to shorten policy and then lengthen norm. So I don't know. So,
but I was reading some of your policies today, and you've got a lot of norms in your policies that most boards don't. So we just want to make sure that whatever in your policy that's a norm, we pull out so that they're compatible and you're not contradicting your policy. But you all have to do what works for you, which is fine. Is there anything else with superintendent and board communications? Or have we beaten that to death?
I think we did staff too.
Yeah, because we talked a lot
We had
about,
superintendent and then we had staff, which we started on.
okay.
And somehow we transgressed.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm not sure why we have so much for staff since we don't have a staff. We have the superintendent.
well, I mean, you will have interactions with staff, especially at board meetings, right? And you want to make sure that all your communications with them is respectful and you're following the chain of command, which we had up earlier. You know, y'all did mention last night when a staff member contacts you anonymously. And I think that's in what we did last night, and that was with emails, I believe. So we don't want to be redundant there, but.
Okay.
would we need to include, like, do we need the respect for staff? Do we have that? Or is it, or hold on. The no surprises during presentations, like that's an example of respect for staff and that we're always respectful.
You'll typically see that under staff and under board meetings,
Okay.
just to restate it, you know. But it's up to y'all. If you don't want to restate it, that's fine.
Well, I thought norms were supposed to address things that you may have issues with. I don't think I've never seen any board member disrespect staff. I just,
I have.
you know,
You never know who's going to be on the board after you, you know?
yeah, okay.
There you go.
And no offense to the new folks coming on, but I have seen it happen in the district I work for. And it
Were
was,
they yell and scream at them? And
oh, it was bad. Yeah. And they were all
Yes.
telling
We've had reports of that even here. So
You see, one of the things you have to understand, and Julie have said, and I know I've said it, I don't know how many times, the only person that we're in charge of in this school district is the superintendent. Now, having said that, you don't micromanage the staff the same as you don't micromanage the superintendent. You can't tell the staff what to do.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised some board members want to.
I know, and some board members that have done that.
Oh, yes. Quite
like
often.
I've been living in a shell then, because I don't. Linda's seen it a lot.
well, you're putting words in my mouth. I said I've had it reported to me. I haven't
Oh, okay.
seen it.
Sam and I can assure you that it happens.
Sure, it does.
Hopefully
Yeah.
not
Several
on
other people
camera.
Yes.
reported it to me.
Yep.
All right, so we're looking at constituents now.
And this is basically what we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think that's one that we did last night. Pieces of that.
So do you want to just reference the
Yeah.
other norm or?
I like that number 5 down there.
Number 5.
Well, that moves on to board members. That's the
Yeah.
next one.
Okay, never mind.
So are you saying you don't want to keep this section of communication? You want to just cut it? But
Constituents, okay.
I mean, I think as a placeholder, it's good. So we realize that that's also part of communication, but I don't know if we can reference the other norm because the other norm basically talks all about this that we talked about last night, or paste the other norm into this spot.
Right.
and what was that one called? That was called constituents?
Stakeholder concerns.
Yeah, we can just merge them somehow, right?
Yeah.
Good.
I'm confused by the word initiate because our policy says we don't initiate.
Okay. Okay.
But I also am still concerned about if a staff member emails an individual board member, I still have an issue with some sort of confidentiality.
Yeah, but I mean, I think this one was written before we had the whole conversation about it last night. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
why I think that we can take out this whole section here and copy in all the things we talked
Yeah,
about
we
last
talked
night.
about that a lot last
Yeah.
night.
All
I
right.
agree on the wording, which I can't remember, but anyway, seems like it was good.
Yeah, so that could just be a cleaning up of the document. And do y'all
Okay.
feel like you, among board members, the preferred communication is email? I know we had a lot of discussion about that last night. But this is a different committee working on this one, so.
I guess it depends on what the word prefer is referring to. I think it's preferred in terms of the ease of it, but is it preferred in terms of
That's what y'all have to agree on.
effectiveness?
And again, you revisit it and see if it's working, right? Later down the road. Or they call it the default communications.
I just remember the previous board president, Jared, saying that that just shouldn't be our default form of communication. So I don't know what you think about that.
What did he think was the preferred? Phone?
I guess phone meeting. I don't know. He didn't think that we should have discussions via email.
Yeah, it's not something you want to get in the habit of doing. And, you know, Mike would have to weigh in on, you know, you don't want to have a meeting via email where decisions are made.
Now I think that in the past that was true, but with the revision of the open meetings law, it specifically says in there that it's not anything wrong with that you can do that. Am I correct on that, Mike?
No, you can't make decisions. Those have to be in open meetings.
Yes.
You know, communications are not prohibited. There's always the danger, and there's some case law that didn't really change. There's some case law about when polls become, you know, polls by email or telephone become decisions that should have been in an open meeting. I mean, frankly, I am conservative, and I prefer not to have a lot of email for open meetings purposes as well as open records purposes.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, you've been really quiet tonight.
Speak when I'm spoken to.
That's a good practice.
What did you say, Mike? No decisions can be made
That's correct.
outside
Board meeting.
an open meeting?
Or outside of a meeting. Yeah,
Outside
open
of a
meetings
meeting.
really the best way to do it. There's some very limited things you can do in executive session, but they still have to be ratified in an open meeting. So I think what you have is good.
So is that open meetings of the full board?
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Or an official meeting.
Yeah, which would be a quorum.
Yeah.
So I was trying to allow for the possibility of one-on-one phone conversations. Can I say something about that?
Why?
Individual.
Do you need to?
I
Yeah,
don't
why
think
would we
so.
say that?
Okay.
I think conference calls of 5 people would definitely be prohibited.
Oh, yes.
One
Yeah.
might.
I'm just trying to allow for the or, you know, encourage that some things when we try to communicate by email, we often fail because we don't get the full spectrum of the conversation or the communication. And so I guess, and as we've been, it's been pointed out to us, our sometimes difficult email conversations don't just impact us, it impacts the larger group of people that are CC'd on the email, including the superintendent. So I was trying to find a way to say that sometimes a phone call is just fine and maybe the best.
I definitely concur with that, whether it's written down here or not. As you have probably heard me say before, telephones still do work for phone calls, even though we forget that.
How about is an efficient way? I don't know that best is a good thing to go with. I don't know. I'm not even sure that should be there, but okay.
May be the most appropriate. We're gonna have it in there. I mean, I agree with Linda. I'm not sure it needs to be in there, but may be appropriate better, maybe more appropriate.
More appropriate?
I want us to weigh whether we even want to put that in.
Well, I'm with you, Linda.
Oh, when I think of, again, when I think about these norms, I think about like if I were a new board member coming on and I didn't know how people typically behaved on this board, I think that it would be helpful to know whether I was supposed to communicate always by email or whether that wasn't the best thing to do, or what things should be email and what things should be phone calls, or whether people even wanted me to call them. So I think it can be helpful.
Okay.
If people want people to call them, I don't know, maybe people don't want us to call them. And so maybe it's not something that is the best thing or appropriate thing.
I like phone calls.
Well, so yeah, I'm just thinking about, Greg, sometimes when you have a thought and you just want to touch base, you call me and we talk for 2 minutes and you share this cool idea. And I'm like, yeah, that's a cool idea. And then you
Right.
go off and do it, you know, and sometimes I wish if Linda could communicate with me by phone, we might not have as many disagreements, and the same with others, you know, so it does feel like sometimes email is just fraught.
I think that's absolutely true. And when I don't get those phone calls, I have that same thought. So maybe we shouldn't put between two board members.
Yeah, phone
Sometimes
call,
a phone call
among board
is more
members.
appropriate.
There you go.
Well,
So-
Charles and I cleared up something with a phone call, so didn't necessarily agree, but we cleared something up.
Or a face-to-face meeting in regular times.
I think it's just a phone call is more appropriate. I wouldn't put among, between. I wouldn't count the people.
Well, I think we have to count the people because of what's been said previously. You don't want to have a quorum.
I agree, but I don't know.
Hmm?
If you call me, that's not a quorum. And if you turn around and call somebody else, that's not a quorum. So however many times you repeat that is not a quorum, it's your intent. You know, if you call 5 people, then yeah, you created a walking quorum. So again, this is the whole issue here. So I don't know that this norm is about that. I thought it was just.
This norm is about communication between board members.
Yeah.
I think.
That's acceptable.
Mm,
If y'all are happy with it though.
is it only 2 board members?
At the same time, or?
That's where it goes. I'm just
Well,
asking. I'm not trying to be difficult on this at all. I just want us to be absolutely certain that we want to make this a norm?
This says to me 2 people on the phone at the same time, but yeah, that's just me.
Even this could be, I mean, so we're trying to be very legalistic and it's really more common sense. You could have a phone tree that resulted in a violation of the Open Meetings Act, even though
Yes.
only 2 people are on the phone at any one time. The point is, talk to each other about individual issues, handle your group issues and decisions at the meetings.
Thank you.
I know
You are so brilliant.
a couple of districts have a norm that says something like, do not talk about other board members, talk to them if you have a problem. You know, they just had to lay it out there because they had issues. That became a norm.
I like that one.
It was a challenge for them, but they've really worked on it. They've been successful this year.
What Mike said a few minutes ago, that is so true about the phone tree. I almost called the name of the county. 5 board members did that. And they ended up on the cognitive watch, and then finally they end up being ejected from the board because it had gone on forever. Of course, there were some other things that happened too.
I've only been here a year, but I have never experienced a phone tree by this board, ever.
No.
I don't even know what that is. Handle, where are we saying? You said talk to each other about individual issues. What was the other thing that you said in a meeting? That was the other part.
Handle the
Don't
business
talk
of
about-
the board in the meeting. Is that what he said?
Yeah, he said talk to each other about individual issues, handle board business in a board meeting or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
That's perfect. For me. Sorry, I'm not speaking for anybody else.
Does that feel complete now?
Actually, that last statement can be joined to number 5 to give it some clarity.
Should it be talked to them if there are conflicts?
You know, people cancel meetings on me, so.
I didn't quite get that, Linda. What was that?
I said people cancel meetings on me when I think we're having a conversation. But that's okay. Constituents do that too, so I'm accustomed to it now.
I don't really understand. You want to?
No, I'm just saying sometimes I can schedule these meetings or try and schedule these meetings and then they get canceled. And so what do you do after that?
Reschedule?
Only if they're willing.
Is there a norm in there somewhere, Linda?
I can't find it. I would have found it, or a policy either. Couldn't find either one. I think when we get back to the respect, that might get us there, and it may not. I don't know. That might be one of those things we don't have an answer to. It's personal preference.
So do we want to move on to media?
Please.
All right. I know there's media on the right-hand side too. I think it's number K. How do y'all feel about what's up here? I mean,
The
typically,
second one, if the media requests a statement on behalf of the entire board, the board president, vice president, or designee will notify the superintendent. That makes sense. Or if applicable, the second person in command, and then respond with a statement that reflects the opinion of the majority of the board. Okay, that's cool.
I mean, the bottom line is you always want your superintendent or her designee to be the spokesman for the district. But when it comes to board matters, it typically falls on the shoulders of the board president.
Yeah, so that's why it was a little bit off-putting, because it said if the media requests a statement on behalf of the entire board. Yes, I think it's fine that we should notify the superintendent, especially, or if applicable, a second person in command. I'm not sure what that means.
So if Dr. Gant's out of town, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
then does it fall to Dr. Maddox?
Yes.
Right.
That would be the board. Howard.
If I'm out of town, I'm assuming then, so let's just say when I was in the hospital with COVID, you would have notified Mr. Gaskins.
Right.
Right.
I was not accessible.
Okay. The main thing is to notify the office of the superintendent, notify the superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Now,
May I break my rule and speak when not spoken to?
Yeah, yes.
How is the superintendent or second in command going to know what the majority opinion of the board is? This is a point I raised last night. The board can only act by majority vote in open meetings.
Oh, thank you.
yeah, I see this as, okay, you've just had a board meeting, y'all voted to do this. Why? You know, and the board felt this way because of what the board comments were and the vote. Typically, though, you also have to have a norm in here because a lot of media, they want to get an opinion from each board member. And so you just have to keep pushing back. Well, our board chair is the official spokesperson, so she will provide that for you. And, you know, you have, if that's an agreement with what y'all want to do moving forward.
See, I think we need to tease this out a little bit more because I grew up in a journalistic family and I support budding journalists and I support UGA journalists, and they're always calling, wanting to talk to board members about, you know, this or that. And you know, I am not going to say anything that's going to get me in trouble, but I don't want to, you know, to sit there and tell a 20-year-old, yeah, I'm an elected official, but I can't talk to you about, you know, how worried am I about, you know, the equity issue among our students in terms of academic achievement. Yeah, I'm concerned about it. The whole school district's concerned about it. And so for me to say, well, I can't tell you what I think about you know, our attempts at equity, you're going to have to talk to the president of the board about that. I'm somehow I understand when there's an official announcement, for instance, when will the new superintendent be announced? You know, I mean, I'm not going to be quoted in the paper as putting that out there. I'll let the president do that. But you know, I just feel like we need to have a better grasp of this subject.
So you're looking at an item that speaks to individual board members and responding, and that initial one that Julie raised was centering on if there's a media request for a response that reflects the board, the entire board.
Right.
So you need to make sure that you have an understanding as a governance team on how you're going to do that. Because if the inquiry is about the full board, then what's your expectation about who's going to respond? You know, who's your media designee? Is it the board chair? And does she have some process to determine how she's going to respond and what she's going to say. The other side of it is your norm is designed to ensure that if you decide that you're going to respond as an individual board member, and you could do this with good intention, however, you could end up with a statement that is not reflective of the full board. So that's why sometimes governance teams decide to have this conversation about that.
And we also have a policy on that, Dr. King. We have a policy on that in terms of who would speak to the media, and that is the president. And of course, now my philosophy on that, and always has been, because some of that by me being a high school principal, and I'm the only one that's going to speak to the media, because I just believe you just can't have multiple people speaking to the media.
So this policy was updated on September 10th, Mr. Worthy. KBCA, and I actually sat in this policy committee meeting, and it calls attention to this, and it says the superintendent or a designee will be the press liaison person for coordinating the release of information concerning the school system and action of the board. And so I read that as district actions, right, which would be the entire school district. And then, yes, I had a conflict when I read the other one over here, where we had said the president would be our spokesperson for the board.
And I understand
there is a distinction. So it's a governing thing too.
Isn't that what y'all just took out of the policy?
Yep.
Because there was a line in there that said the board president would represent the board.
Right.
That's correct.
Taken out. And so
now
again,
it's taken out, right?
it was taken out because it was under the K policies, and the K policies deal with the district.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I don't see, and again, that will, if we do what if we point out what the policy says, and then it avoids the problem that Linda says, where the president is trying to speak on what you were raising too. How can the president speak for the entire board? You know, I mean, I'm thinking in terms of, you know, how is school going to be opened up next month? I mean, that is an administrative rollout, of which I wouldn't even after a work session, I wouldn't begin to explain it because of the nuances of it. So
that typically would go to the superintendent.
Right.
And typically if it's from the board, then the chair works with whomever to help craft the message and sends it to y'all. And hopefully there's consensus around it. A lot of times it's a quick response because journalists have deadlines. So you got to figure out how you're going to handle those logistics and an understanding of that.
So I want to be clear.
Going back to the
policies are dealing with the district, right? I can't remember the subheading under that.
Yes, and I'm going back to the policy. The policy says that when there's an official announcement, you know, so-and-so has been suspended from their job. I mean, that's not coming from the board president. That's coming from the superintendent. So I'm trying to see what exactly our board president would come out and say. You know, I'm trying to figure out.
Well, sometimes there's things that just apply to the board. Let's say you've hired a new superintendent.
Yes.
Okay. You're not going to have the superintendent be the spokesperson for that.
Well, that would be the only example I can think of then.
Right. I mean,
that is our only employee.
That's right.
So anything else dealing with the district or even with an individual school and the staffing issue, to me, would come from the superintendent. I think it's really I think the president's being jammed in saying, what does your board think? You know, well, we just voted. So, you know, you were there when the discussion took place. So, I mean, if there's a vote, then the board has decided. And so, so was it what the press says? Did you hire principal so-and-so? Yes, we just took a vote 9-0 and we just hired principal so-and-so as an associate.
But that's not the experience that I've seen. I've seen the experience where maybe I didn't vote the way somebody else voted or the majority voted. If I was in a minority vote and somebody wants the minority's opinion, that's when I've been approached to say, well, why did you choose not to support, the board on something like this?
And you have a
And
right
I can
to,
only speak for myself on this,
Right.
and usually I've already voiced that opinion in the vote itself, and so it's just an expansion on that. In that case, I'm speaking for myself.
right.
And that's the end of that. That's as far as that conversation can go, because the vote's
You have a
already.
right to do that. Right.
Right.
Well, hopefully the journalist has sat through the meeting and they can quote you, based on
Yeah.
your board comments.
Right. Well, they
But
have
I
to
mean,
send it to me
even
before they
after the
post it.
meeting, if in that situation, Linda has under what both our policy and also in terms of the changing law, has a right to express, you're saying, I support the majority of the board. However, this is why I voted how I voted. She can reiterate that. Right?
Well, y'all have to come to an
Well,
agreement here.
Well, I mean,
that's why this norm is so tough.
it sounds good discussing this, folks, but it's not gonna happen that way. I can't tell you how many calls that I have received and emails that I have received from these journalists, red and black, and the list goes on and on and on, simply wanted me to make a statement simply because I'm the past president. And I said, well, it doesn't work that way. You have to call the president. But now, as Julie said, we got to make a decision on this because, and I still say, and I believe this, I believe it from my heart, you can't have multiple people talking to the media. Now, some things in general, it would be okay, but now further down the road, especially when you're dealing with hot topics, et cetera, and whatnot, you're gonna have a grand mess when you have multiple people talking to the media.
Yeah, it's like educating your stakeholders on what your role is. When you have a norm that says the board president or the superintendent, if you want to quote from the board, then you have to go to the board chair. That's just what our norm is. So
absolutely.
And I had to do it many times.
Okay, but here's the difference. You're talking about a decision on the part of Mike, what's the law say about school board members being able to express an opinion?
Yes, so there was a statute passed a few years ago that said the board shall adopt no policy that restricts board members' First Amendment rights, except that you can retain the requirement of not discussing executive session matters. So, but let's go back to the practicality. Let me remind you, you have a professional PR department within your district, as well as a superintendent who has a PR degree from one of the finest PR schools in the country, because my daughter's getting the same degree this semester from the same school.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm back to what Greg said earlier. I'm not sure what the board would ever be commenting on independent of the superintendent, other than hiring a new superintendent.
I get questions about policy.
But I think there are also issues, there are also times, as Greg has mentioned, that people want opinions about things that are non-board related. I mean, of course, we can say general topics that may be related to education, but I think that the individual board member should have some right to be able to express their opinion, not on behalf of the board, especially if it's not board related, if it's not related to board matters.
Well, in that instance, if y'all are in agreement of that, then put the norm in there, if that happens, that you communicate that you spoke with this media representative to the rest of the board and the superintendent, so they're not caught off guard.
I'm thinking about instances where after a board meeting, and it's often student journalists, so it's like our own students who come up to us at the end of the meeting and want to ask us a question. And it happened to me once, and Lakeisha already had like 3 people deep who were wanting to talk to her, and so this journalist wanted to ask me a question, and I felt if I said to him, oh, well, you have to talk to the board chair, that was putting him in a position where he now had to wait like for 4 people to give an answer. And that was, I don't know. And it felt weird because it was one of our own student journalists. So I wasn't going to say something on behalf of the entire board, but are we still sticking with this part here where it says if they request an individual opinion, the board member, it's okay as long as they say, like, I'm only speaking for myself, but here's what I think, or
That's what y'all have to come to an agreement on.
And
So not
sometimes
only,
it may be appropriate to do it in the format or form of almost a press conference. So I recall one of those nights where we had 4 or 5 people in line to talk to Dr. Gant, and there were 4 or 5 people in line to talk to me, and they were all almost asking some of the same questions. And maybe we need to look at, utilizing our communications person, and after a contentious or very popular board meeting, when you have all of these people there. So, the superintendent, there's been a vote to relieve a superintendent of their contract. I mean, that's just the elephant in the room, right? So
Yep.
the appropriate thing would be for our communications person to even say, right after the meeting, we know we have several journalists here. Dr. Gant and Dr. Thomas are going to be available if you all want to come, because they're asking the same things. So some of that we can look at operationally, how we handle it, and just have Ms. Moore coordinate that after those types of meetings, because generally we don't have that many journalists there. It's usually when there is something going on, and we can almost always predict that. And if we didn't know it was going to be a hot topic, when you look up and they're all there and the expectation is that she be there, that can be an expectation of her role.
I like that. That's a
I do
good
too,
suggestion.
because
Yeah.
you're gonna have to have some type of agreement on this that's gonna, I'll say this, that's gonna keep us out of trouble. Because some of the classes that I had in terms of becoming an administrator, so when you're talking to the media as a principal, especially a high school principal, because you want to get more requests than anybody else. And this is what one professor said, and I quote, "Do not have diarrhea at the mouth." And then when something comes out in the paper, you'll say, did I say that? Journalists can be pushy folks, okay? And of course, Mike probably could back me up on this. I've always been told, once you're sitting at that table and you something that you say, etc., but when you talking to the media and it goes in that newspaper, you're pretty much on your own if you have said something that is really out of line. So you have to think about these things.
Well, I think that's a good point. What Charles just said was you're on your own. What you lose when you just put up the wall and you say, I can't talk to you, student journalist, or I can't talk to you, journalist, is that you lose any chance of educating constituents, of which journalists are. They're not just the enemy, they're also our fellow citizens, and sometimes our relatives. And I think one thing that does bother me here is that we lose the chance to explain what happened. Sometimes board meetings are convoluted, and so a board member can explain what happened without taking sides on anything, just to try to educate what happened. But if the answer is, oh no, we have a norm, and I can't even say this to you, and we walk away, we've lost an opportunity.
I think that was taken care of in that first bullet, right? If it's your opinion.
Well, but it seems
Saying
that
we can do that, are we not?
Mr. Worthy seemed to be going in a different direction.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that direction is counter to the law. So I think that the First Amendment right here is what's under protection. I don't know. State law. Okay.
But the First Amendment right is not going to protect you if you've said something to the media that you shouldn't have said.
Well, that's the risk that we take.
Yeah, it can always.
Well, there's a big risk.
I mean, they can always take it out of context for sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
I have did one school systems norms, and they will not do anything on television unless it's live, because they just edit the soundbite how they want it, and so they have to agree if they do any kind of local TV news, it's got to be live, which is
Mhm.
rare. So they just
So,
don't.
so individual board members, if you're going to do this, then individual board members are going to have to remember to specify that they're not speaking for the entire board.
Right.
And if
But
you're going
we
to
have
do
that.
this, yeah. And so, but I'm just saying, each board member will have to remember that. If
I
none
just
of this
placed the
happens.
statute that Greg asked about in the chat, by the way.
Yep. There it is.
And what Dr. King said a few minutes ago, Mike, there's a state statute on that too. Individual board members cannot speak for the entire board unless the entire board has authorized them to do so.
Yeah, that's part of your local board code of ethics, I think.
It is.
The individual members have no power. They're only as members of the board.
And when you're talking to the media, when they're approaching you, sometimes, unless you're thinking on your feet, you may just forget that and get to talking. But anyway, just be careful, folks. I've dealt with the media.
But it's up to you
times.
individually to be careful, because this statute, I'll just read it out loud. A local board of education shall not adopt or follow any code of ethics which prevents the members of such board from discussing freely the policies and actions of such board outside of a board meeting. So both things are true. I don't think you can impose this on your fellow board members, but each one of you as an individual board member needs to be careful for all of the reasons that have been discussed.
Right.
Good.
Could we add,
Just add
Oh,
some.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lakeisha.
Oh, okay. I was wondering, can we add to the norm about, could we specify that we're talking about Board of Education, where it says if the media requests an individual opinion of a board member about board related matters? Because this is not talking about necessarily other topics, is it?
Right. I think it's only
Like-
talking about board related matters.
Right, like if they're asking you about something about your job or your or your something outside of the board, is that what you mean?
Yeah, or other, like oftentimes I'm contacted, and I think several of us may be at different times to talk about different things that we might be interested in. So if it's related to some other issue, if it's about criminal justice, if it's about below ball, I mean, there are a whole lot of different things that I think we all have opinions on and we're all involved in. And so I just want to be sure, well, I want to be clear that that's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
Or are we?
I think we're only talking about school things as it relates to our individual opinions.
And there's
Like I can't imagine. I'm involved with the cemetery restoration. I'm involved with below Baldwin. There are controversial things, but they have absolutely nothing to do with the school district. So I have those discussions all the time.
Let me, we have a sentence in there that we're just, to me, we're just micromanaging. Members should inform other board members when they have these interviews. I had a student journalist call me up 2 weeks ago and said, when is school opening up? I said, heck if I know, you're gonna have to ask the superintendent. So I sit down and I write an email. I said, I just got called by, I don't even know her name, from the Red and Black, and wanting to know when school was gonna open up brick and mortar. And I responded, so I'm sorry. I just can't see that. Or if somebody calls me up and says, what do you think the biggest issue is in the Clark County School District? And I say, well, personally, as a as an individual board member, I think it's equity issues. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm talking about discipline. I'm talking about academic achievement. I can have a conversation that lasts 3 minutes and end up writing an email to the entire superintendent and the rest of the board members. That's going to take me 10 minutes to write. And I just think that there's got to be some common sense in this. I'm sorry to get so passionate about this, but I grew up in a journalistic family, and this discussion just really bugs me.
You know, out of all of this, what I want us to be, what I want to be comfortable with, and I'll speak for myself, and I want our norms to either validate me or to change my course. If we have a request for the opinion of the board president or their designee answers that request. If we have a request for something that's happening in the district, following our chain of command, that goes to the superintendent. And then if somebody asks my personal opinion about something, that's my discretion to answer that with a disclaimer that I am speaking for myself. Am I clear on that, or am I still confused?
I think you're right, and I don't think you have to tell me as a fellow board member who you talked to and what you said. I don't think it's any of my business.
I never remember to tell y'all that, so it's not because I didn't know that I had to or I should.
Well, no, we have that line that's highlighted in there. That's
So I wrote that line after Linda said something about being disappointed that she didn't know about somebody's interview. Honestly, I just added that.
Okay. Well,
I didn't know about what.
I think we need to unadd it.
Not interviews. If the press calls you for an interview, go for it. I should read the paper or do whatever I need to do there. I'm sure I'm not disappointed about that. There might be something else I'm disappointed about, but it's not that.
As Julie said a few minutes ago, because time is of essence here, we need to make a decision. We need to make a decision whether we're going to have a designated person, be it the president, or whomever, to address the media and the rest of the board stay out of it, or what you all are saying now, that if you get a call, you're going to address the board. The media. But I know I'm not going to do it, but we need to make a decision, folks.
Well, I'm happy with what's there.
Okay.
I agree with that. Was printed right now.
I'm not comfortable with, why do we need an exception for student journalists? What's different?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we need that either.
That needs to come
I don't think we need that anymore either. I think that was just part of the discussion, but I think it covers it with the first part about individual opinion.
And I really like the recommendation from Dr. Thomas about a press conference after major decisions.
Yep.
That are high impact to the community.
Yep.
I've made a note to speak to our PR people about that.
Do you need to put in anything about being positive towards the district? No, let's say the board passes an action item, but you voted against it. You know, there is a code of ethics that even though you didn't agree with the board, you have to go along with the majority opinion.
Oh, absolutely. But that's in our policy and that's in our code of ethics. So why would we need to have that in a norm?
Right.
I mean, I'm okay with it being there, but I mean, that totally is, from my perspective, that was understood.
Remember, that was also changed when this statute that I put in the chat was passed. The Department of Education modified the local board code of ethics so now it still says that you have to abide by the majority decision. They removed and support.
Okay.
Again, to be consistent with, every member has the right to express their opinion. If Linda Davis voted against it and she wants to tell the press why she voted against it, the board cannot restrict her from doing that.
Right.
And John, what did we do with our policy? Did we take it out and then put it back in, or what did we do? Because John was part of that process.
We put it back in.
Oh, did we? Okay, we need to take it out
Take
again.
it out because that's against the state law.
Thank you.
Okay. So what happened was I advocated that the words and support be in there just simply because abide by is a very fuzzy term. And this board has had some issues with members actually supporting decisions.
And the law says now I don't have to, so take it out.
So Mike, could you repeat that one more time just so we're clear?
Yes, sir. So when that statute was passed, the Georgia Department of Education modified the local board member code of ethics to remove the words "and support" from the ethics code.
Right, but we voted to put it in. That's
So
we just went through
how
this.
can you, so if you have "and support" in your code of ethics, how is that not violative of the statute?
I would assume that the statute is a baseline. You're saying that because we went through BH and added a whole lot of stuff to it at one point and then took it all back out and stripped it down to where we thought BH was.
The board member code of ethics from the Department of Education is a baseline. The statute is law.
Right.
And the statute says you cannot have a code of ethics that restricts members from freely discussing policies and actions of the board. If you have a code of ethics that says each member has to support the actions of the board, how does that not violate it?
Well, so let me ask you this, Mike.
Wow.
We just hired a new superintendent. Well, I didn't want that person, so I'm not going to support that person going forward, even though that's a new superintendent. Is support meaning in that statute communications? You don't have to support it outright to the public, but it's still essentially law because you've just hired someone. So
That's how we got to where we are now.
Well, yeah, sorry.
I am only the messenger. I'm telling you what the law says.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering how to interpret that as a board member. Oh, well, they voted this way, but I don't have to support that. I'm going to go in this direction.
Here's what Julie, here's how I interpret it, is I interpret that you don't undermine that decision. In other words, I can still disagree with the majority of the board, but that's a whole different cry than saying, okay, we're going to have a protest at the central office on Friday at 5 p.m. That is as a board member is like undermining a decision of the board that I'm a member of. Right. So that's what I would say to make that distinction between support in terms of my act. I'm not going to undermine the majority of the board. So maybe that's a better way to, I don't know, Mike.
That's true only if you agree with it, right? If you're a part of the majority.
But I'm not going to undermine it. I'm going to disagree with it. I'm going to let people know I disagree with it. But that's the same thing as organizing resistance.
Right.
I think Greg's example is a very good one. And to answer the question Julie posited, it does not say you're not going to support the superintendent. It says that you have the right to freely express your opinion on the board's vote to hire or not hire the superintendent.
Okay.
But yeah, just to Greg's point, I mean, so if Greg voted not to hire that person, I think the law is clear that he's free to talk to the press or anyone else about that. Right. I don't know any other way to interpret that. I'm open to being told if you think there is one, but that's very different than, and I'm going to set out to do everything I can to undermine and make this superintendent fail, sort of the Mitch McConnell Obama statement. I don't think we have to go there.
Thank God.
That's a good example too, Mike.
I see, abide by covers that in your policy there.
So then that needs to be corrected.
But I think we had a whole discussion about this, both in policy committee meetings and as a full board when it was voted on, right?
But when a state law comes down that changes something, that's when we go back into our policy.
But we just did this in
Just
August.
It's
So we
almost
did an
like
add-on here is what I saw Lakeisha, right?
We already did
What were you
this.
saying?
No, I was saying, I think, I recall when we had this conversation, and we discussed adding support. I mean, the conversations were the same, I think, based on what Mike shared at the time, but then based on the discussion, my interpretation of what was shared was that we could add to, or we could add that word, but now I mean, perhaps I had that confused with
No.
Code of Ethics versus the state law.
I totally did. I thought for
Dr.
some
Knox,
reason that the board could enact a
your
policy that would override something. That was the understanding,
It won't
misunderstanding.
override the law.
Well, I know we can't override the law, but I thought that the hierarchy was federal, state, local, and then policy.
Okay, so it
Correct.
sounds like it needs to, this might have implications for policy again.
Wow.
Sounds like it.
So let me just try to articulate where I was coming from on this. Just for the big picture, we're having these meetings because we have been investigated by an accreditation organization. One of the weaknesses that certainly I have conveyed is that not all decisions were actually supported by all board members. And by support, I mean, once the vote is taken, my understanding as a school board member is, even if I disagree with it, that is the decision of the body and that's not something to undermine. If that's been a weakness, as I think it's been for this board in my tenure, then is it really against the law to tighten this just a little bit compared to the wording that Mike was saying?
But does support mean undermine? I don't think lack of support is an undermining. I think support all decisions of the board. I'm not sure that I don't have to undermine something in order to not support it. I can simply express my opinion and be done with it. I don't think it's saying to me that I'm going to abide by the decision of the board, which I must do. And if I'm doing that, how in the world can I undermine it?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's been a weakness of this board. And
I
so
think it's been a failure of
so
this board
doctors
to understand this clearly, and I think you're right. It is a weakness.
very much so. So Doctors Raymond King, that was where we were coming from when we dealt with this just in August, in terms of making sure, keeping in as much language as possible to say that this isn't just some fuzzy abide by. This is about actually having disagreements, but then presenting a united front and actually supporting decisions and not using the first opportunity to overturn decisions. That's been a weakness.
So when I hear presenting a united front, that tells me that you're trying to force me to abide by and then become more than abiding by. Now I'm supposed to jump over and support. I can abide by it without doing any of those things. I can simply know that this is how it's going to be and then work within those confines.
Well, I think that boards that are able to disagree but then agree to give something a try even if they didn't vote for it are probably stronger boards.
Yeah,
and there are probably some strong individuals on those boards. I agree.
Yeah, well, you all are, I think you're hitting it in most cases, because the intent here is that when the majority decision has been made, that majority decision then moves forward, even if you voted against it. However, seemingly the way that it's written here, when you say, and based on the law, abide by and support, that the change in the law is such that the support raises the issue in terms of how you have it written. And so you cannot,
because of our understanding of support.
Right, but and you cannot develop policy that's counter to the intent of the law. which I'm preaching to the choir,
So
but
I
of
guess
course you
all
got to
I'm
go back
trying
to
to
that.
tell you, and I've been unsuccessful in this over a period of months now, is that when the statute was passed, at least the Georgia Department of Education felt like and support was inconsistent with the statute, and so they removed it from their model code. You can have philosophical discussions about whether that's correct or not.
So getting back to media, do you want to have one line in terms of, you know, you are the cheerleaders for the school district and you want to be as positive as possible when speaking to media?
I like that.
So that's kind of an expectation for everyone to not bash your district. Just a thought.
Folks, it's 9:01. I'm sorry. I have got to leave. I'm real political and really into this. So I'm very sorry. Lakeisha, what can I do? But leave.
Have a good evening. Great. Well, we'll be wrapping up, I think, soon, and we'll
Okay.
just follow, you know.
Thank you.
We'll follow up.
All we have.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing, and we'll do a follow-up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Worthy. Have a good evening.
Sure.
Do folks like what she just put in, Dr. Yeager?
Good. I thought we were done with this one now.
Social media. This is our last one for communications. Maybe we can bang this out real quick.
I literally pasted what you had in yours over here, so we can work on it. We don't need to look at this anymore.
Board members are discouraged.
Does this mean to set up a separate Facebook or media page like Dr. Knox has done and Dr. Gant have done? Is that what you mean by an official district page, or you mean only on like a CCSD page?
What I was going to ask too.
I think when we discussed it, we were talking about like official district pages, because I don't think we can regulate. Well, I mean, I think it's a slippery slope when we get into personal social media pages, of course, unless we're, I think somewhere in our policy, unless we're actually like discussing matters of the board, like having a discourse about board stuff. So I think we meant the official Board of Education pages. Dr. Knox, do you recall, you or Mr. Stevens?
Yes, I think the phrase official district page probably did refer to social media pages that individual board members set up. But of course, that's not really an official district page.
Right.
That's because it's not through the district.
So one thing that I always did was any news coming out of City Schools of Decatur, I would share what they posted on their official page to promote good news. We got ranked #1 in this, or a student won this. We just won the football championship, whatever. That's positive, because that's part of your role, is to, help be a cheerleader for the district and spread good news and keep your friends informed.
So should that be on a page separate from the board member's personal page, where the personal page may contain information about political views or
No, I personally don't think so. I didn't have an official page for my boards.
Okay.
But I never posted anything on my social media pages about politics. As soon as I became a board member, that just went out the door. I still don't. You know.
So let me understand this
Whoops.
statement. It says that we're discouraged from posting CCSD related business on a personal social media page. Okay, that's clear. And we've had that for a while. And then a board member may post CCSD information on an official district page. What does that look like?
I don't have access to my school board, my school systems.
Me either.
That's not what it was.
Okay, because I was just confused by this.
I can't imagine that, because I remember we had long conversations about this with the former superintendent, who wanted to know, again, if it's relative to why would you take anything from the school system's district page and then post it on your personal page when all of the information about the district is on the school district's page?
Well,
that was one of the concerns that we talked about.
My friends might not follow the district, so I'm just sharing good news. I don't share bad news, and usually you don't put bad news on social media. That's just not.
Yeah, because that's something you maybe tweet out or Instagram out or something like that. And if I were good at that, that's how I would use it. But in terms of posting things from the district, I don't do that on my personal social media page. If I find an article or something that I've read that I think that people who read my page should know about, because it might espouse a view or alert them to something, some changes that are coming nationally or something, I might put something like that on my page. But I don't.
I was just gonna say, but I think that's a personal preference, right? I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing to put district stuff on your personal page if you want to share it, or if you just want to, like actually share the post from the district page on your page, which then may get more people to follow the district page.
Right. That's the goal.
You mean like on your personal page, or like your role as a?
Well, I think
because
Dr. Rain was saying she just had her own page, her own personal page.
Very, very careful what I posted on social media and anybody's comments or likes. I just stayed away from controversial things, and that was one of our norms.
Right.
Because whatever I do reflects on my fellow board members, the district. It's unfortunately, when you become a board member, you have to really, really focus on those types of things. You can't just be yourself always. Now, some board members do, and they get in trouble. But one of the reasons why you have a norm on this is you see a lot of sometimes board members, okay, I think Miss So-and-so at the middle school is terrible. Have you had any bad instances with her? I mean, you'll have board members posting things like that to get feedback from local parents and
wow,
and that's bad. But
that's very bad.
And that's why there's a norm to hopefully dissuade that. But it's okay.
My concern about reposting district news, if you're reposting district news, that feedback that would have been quite visible to the district is now hidden on your page. And so to me, that takes away from the effectiveness and the efficacy of the district page.
But
otherwise they never would have seen it.
They wouldn't have seen it.
Or can you send them to the district page? Send them, give them a link to go to that page. Is that what we mean by reposting? You just putting a link?
Yeah, so basically, I just shared some great news about Clark County's Career Academy being ranked a certain way. And so y'all posted on yours, and then I shared on mine. And so it exposes the readers here in Decatur what's happening in Clark County.
So has this been a problem?
When they comment, they're actually commenting on our page.
They comment on your page. They just
so they and so we might not want to know about that, but I don't know. I'm just asking.
Have you all had challenges with this?
No.
So I don't think I don't think people use it that much. I think we've all been a little bit like, we're not exactly sure how to do this well. Yeah, I mean, that's my experience.
Well, the intent of boards that develop these norms is to do what Julie just mentioned, to ensure that even when new board members come on, you know, some of, you know, board members are use social media more. They might not know that you really shouldn't be handling board business via your personal site. That's really what it's designed to ensure that you don't do, and creating negative issues that goes back to why you're not supporting a
Right.
vote for a majority rule or something like that. So that's typically why governance teams decide to do this, and that's why you see those sample bullets that are there.
Yeah, I'm nervous about that.
And
I think that there are definitely issues, but I don't think social media is going away. So I do think it's important to develop some kind of norms around it. And I actually think that sometimes answering things or putting out information on social media can dispel some of the rumors that are out there when we don't say anything.
I agree.
right.
I've seen some of those postings and I've not seen that to be the case. What I've seen is, you know, one post and it can be a misstatement, a misunderstanding. It doesn't even have to be true. And it can rally hundreds of people or, you know, get hundreds of likes. And yeah, I had to leave that kind of stuff alone because this just really, it starts to influence your thinking, I think. And so I'm a little bit concerned about posting official school district proprietary information on personal sites.
But I don't.
That's my concern there. And then the other thing that I'm concerned about is this statement that says notify the audience that the information is being shared and does not serve as a statement on behalf of the board, and yet you're the official board member posting it. That's difficult for me. And I understand that you can say that and they should believe you, but that's difficult, I think.
I don't think I understand that.
I don't either.
Notify the audience, if applicable, that the information is being shared and does not serve as a statement on behalf of the board. Do you know the genesis of this, Dr. Gant?
I can't remember.
Okay.
I think it was related to just being sure that whatever was shared was not misinterpreted as like an official statement.
Yeah, I've seen you do that where you say something about what's going on and then you say this is not a statement by the full board or something. You always qualify your posts, it seems like, with that piece.
Kind of like what we've said,
Right.
the media statement that was above, that if you're making a personal statement, you say this is not on behalf of the board. This is, wasn't that in the one before? Did I just make that
Yeah,
up?
no, you didn't. That's, yeah.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
think so too, because I think we also had in mind that we may share stuff that's not even, that's sort of loosely related to the board. So let's just say we found this article on play.
Mhm.
And, you know, we're like, oh, you know, this is a good reference, but it's for sharing information, but not to make a statement that, you know, the board believes that, you know, we should have, you know, 3 hours of play or whatever. So I think we had it in mind that there may be things that we share on our pages. And again, I'm talking about like our district Board of Education pages that may be shared from the district, maybe shared directly about the district, but also some things that may be just simply related to education.
So if I'm posting something about playtime, which is recess, then we say be mindful on posting about policies. Isn't that exactly what that is?
Politics.
Oh, I can't read anymore. It's after at 9 o'clock. Oh, thank you. That helps a lot. But it's after 9 o'clock. All right, so politics, and that's political too. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that. The idea of posting official board things on our personal page.
I can't maintain 2 separate Facebook accounts. I mean, much less 2 separate Twitters, 2 separate whatevers. I mean, people know who I am. I have an extra 300 friends because I'm on the school board that I don't even know all of them. And I'm tempted to drop them all, except that they use me as an information source to keep up with the district. And I'm positive I don't complain about the board on social media. I don't do anything wrong. I just post information because I feel like that's my job, to keep the community that I know informed, and people trust me because I generally share interesting, accurate information.
That sounds like a best practice to me.
And see, I have, but typically it's rare that I share board information on my personal page. I have before, so I'm not saying that I have not. But sometimes, particularly if I'm sharing something that was just, whatever, if there's a school opening schedule that's posted or whatever, and I share that just opens up the door for a whole lot of other conversation.
Yeah, you
which
have
is
to
not a,
choose wisely, because
yeah.
the other thing is if you post something that's going to cause a lot of comments to be negative, one of the other norms is don't respond to negative comments on social media, and definitely don't contradict fellow board members in the same thread, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very, very careful on what you post. So I only posted non-confrontational things. Yeah, I didn't post everything.
I think the bigger problem in this district is that we have a couple of group pages that are very active and often very critical of what's happening in the district. And when I was new at this, I ventured into those and tried to correct misunderstandings or comment on, opinions. And boy, oh boy, did I get in trouble fast.
Yes.
So that,
it's a no-win situation.
yeah, that one just seems fraught. And so I don't go in there very often anymore on purpose. Sometimes I go in just to read what's going on.
Yeah, and that's good to be mindful of what's happening. But sometimes those people will tag you in a comment.
They do.
And try to draw you in, and you just ignore it because they will.
Just a reminder that we lost a full board, so I don't know how effective any changes you make now might be. So just think about what next steps might need to be at this point.
Yeah, and I feel like this one is difficult too. So I wonder if
maybe it's time to do my favorite thing.
What'd you say?
Maybe.
Is it my time?
I was just thinking that maybe to work on this one, we could all write down what things that we're most concerned about, or what parts of it would be most important to each person, so that next time we get to it, we can have that, or have questions that we could answer. I'm not sure. I do think that this one is going to be more difficult.
An important one.
Mm-hmm. I think it's one, definitely we want to have with the entire board, because I'm not comfortable with it.
And a little bit fresher also.
Right.
We're down.
So it sounds like with the 3, I think that we have the next steps for those is to sort of do formatting, and also maybe just another read through to be sure grammatically, everything is where it needs to be before it moves to an agenda item, like for us to adopt those. And then as it relates to these that are remaining, social media, town halls, and LSGTs, but there may be a couple of others remaining.
Strategic planning.
Self-eval. So I'm thinking and
hopefully it won't be too tough.
Yeah, and maybe we start with these that we have. If these are adopted, we'll have, I think, 6, right? If these 3 are adopted, and then we've adopted 3, and then, the board can discuss how we want to prioritize the others. We might want to have a time period where we sort of get used to the ones that we have, because this is sort of a lot. We may want to say at our next, when we have a retreat, we're going to tackle one, or when we review these next, or who knows, we may want to just do a draft at each work session or what have you. But it seems like we have 3 that may be ready after a little bit of tweaking that we can, that we've completed.
Y'all done a lot of work. This is good stuff. I think you're very, very close though. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about, I don't think you have norms on already, are, they're kind of an expansion of your code of conduct, and it's the roles and responsibilities, kind of as a restatement at the beginning of that sample document, which kind of sets the tone for everything that follows.
And so maybe if, we can continue conversations on just how to move forward, at some point during one of our work sessions, we can, discuss how we want to move forward with the development of future norms. Or ones, who knows, perhaps we may want to say, okay, of these that are left, which ones have caused us the most, the most issues, or which ones do we think would be more relevant right now?
And, maybe you look at these that are in front of you that you adopt as a draft, I know you want to complete as much as possible before early December.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, like maybe these ones that are already, we have the samples for, we could kind of go through line by line and just decide, yes, this sounds good, this doesn't. And then if we want to add anything to them, but there's already a structure in place.
Right. That's what a lot of boards do. This is a jumping off point for them.
So meaning like at a work session, or what, is that what you're meaning, Kara?
Yeah, like we could take one of these, like this governance roles and responsibilities, and just go through it, or everybody could get it ahead of time and mark ones. Yes, I like this bullet point. No, I don't like this one. Or here's what I'd like to add. And then we could discuss that at a work session. Maybe that would be quicker. Maybe it wouldn't.
Okay. At least you're covering all ground, and whatever's missing.
You mean with this particular norm, with the governance roles and responsibilities, or all?
Yeah. Well, strategic planning and self-eval. You can see what's in there already.
Okay, gotcha.
See, how you feel about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they're towards the end. There they are.
Okay, so I think the next steps would be then the remaining norms that are left for us to review the samples that we have and take notes, and then at our next work session, we can
knock them out.
Yep, knock them out, and at least have a draft, like a work, just a draft or a finalized, product. But then we can also, like what's been mentioned earlier, we can also review these at any time. We can tweak them at any time. We can add to them, take some out if we feel like we don't need them.
Sounds like something we could do every year at a retreat, is just revisit all the norms and look at them.
That's what we did. It was real helpful.
And we still have space in our, I think based on our training calendar, I think there was like a December, there was talk at one point about December that we hadn't really finalized, but the idea of a retreat, and I know that's after the visit, but I mean, just to say that could be a good time too, to just review all of these all together again. Like right now, I know we're reviewing them and creating them in chunks.
Do we have time in our November work session to kind of adopt the standards, the standardized list?
I think so, but I'm curious to know what you all think. I think if we go ahead and read them and have an idea of what we think about them, with understanding that our goal is to adopt something that speaks to these areas, I think we could, but you all also know sometimes I miss the mark with estimating what we can get done and during our work sessions. But I think if we do the work ahead of time, it's not many, and the norms that are here are not long. But what are your thoughts?
I think so.
I think are we talking about taking the GSBA document and for the ones that we haven't covered and just, giving feedback on that?
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing? Are we going to just
Yeah.
put this in board docs and then allow us to do that and give us a time by which we need to respond with this? And then synthesize that before we have a discussion?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Seems like it could fit on the November work session.
But I don't
And I
want the
think
work
if we
session
come
to
to
be the
the,
first time we're looking at this unless we're talking about spending the night at the work session.
No, I think the idea was that everybody would kind of, my thought was that individually we would like mark each one like yes, no, like what you liked and what you didn't like, and then bring that with you so that we could discuss it. I think maybe we could do more than that before the meeting, but I just wasn't sure how much collaboration we could do that was not in a meeting. So that was why I kind of
Yeah, I
stopped with
think
the
if-
individual.
if we come with the goal of completing the remaining norms, I don't think we would have to spend a lot of time on them. But again, I think that would have to be a commitment on all of our parts.
Okay. I think I almost understand the instructions, but so if we can put those in writing, I'll do my best to comply.
I think they are to read through these, to identify the ones that are left, and to read the sample norms that GSBA has provided. And that if you see something that needs to be taken out, like these are we will have these as our draft norms. If you see something that needs to be taken out or added or changed, come to the work session ready to make those recommendations so that we can move efficiently through the work session and have a norm for these areas that are missing.
So will you send out an email detailing these instructions for everybody?
Might want to highlight which domains.
Like, or send out the document and say, look at these, be ready to give your opinion on each thing at the whatever work session.
Okay, I think it was strategic planning, self-assessment,
And governance roles.
governance roles. Those were the three that were on here. And then I don't know if we need to, I don't know with the next work session if we'll need to do LSGTs and town halls, because I heard that is something that we would visit.
I'm with you, Linda.
I heard that is something that we would
kick that
visit
down
in
the
future.
road.
Okay.
No,
So
I don't want to talk about that until next year.
Okay, so I think those are the three, but correct me if I'm wrong. Someone please speak now.
What's this?
I think
one?
those are the three.
Decision making is also one that y'all don't have covered, but it's pretty straightforward.
Okay. So decision making was that fourth one?
Yes.
So we'll just go through the samples, individually decide how we feel about them, and be ready to discuss them.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we sure that a Google Doc wouldn't do this? Or make it a form?
I know, I thought about the form, but then I thought that might be like almost a form of voting. So I didn't think that was appropriate.
Well, this isn't executive session stuff. This is board stuff. So there would be no problem with voting on something like this.
But I mean,
we're not voting, we're just collecting feedback.
Right. I don't know. I mean,
it's like a survey. I like the form because you can get your responses and put them in a spreadsheet if you have to. And
hey, Julie.
Right there together.
Is this arrangement of the norms how we should sort of put them all together? Is that sort of the standard? Should we try to organize them in the same?
I would organize them better under communications. I don't know how that happened.
Okay.
And I apologize for that.
Yeah, we shouldn't have more than 3 bullets. We should definitely number those guys.
Yeah, anything related to communications like social media and media, I would put under communications.
Okay. But where it talks about the domains, we should keep that part of the organization.
Yeah.
Oh, those are applicable, but you know, you don't have to use them. But that's
Okay.
Yeah, that's there just to remind the reader how it
I think
aligns
that's
with the
important.
effective practice, but you don't have, some boards put it there, some don't, so.
and
it's
y'all
up to you.
have been putting it in your previous ones, I believe.
I really like having it there.
I think it's
guiding,
a nice addition.
the guidance, the guidance.
Okay.
Mike,
So, oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask Mike, if we made it into a form where each one of these bullet points was a, like, do you agree or not agree with this? Is that okay? If everybody fills that out.
So long as it's a public document.
Okay.
Wait, okay. I'll follow up with my question about that, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Would it be accessible to the public? I guess if it's on board docs and it's.
Yes.
I mean, while we're working on it, if it's a Google Doc, no. I guess technically anyone can have a link to it, but I don't know that it's accessible in real time, like while we're working on it, like for people to view it. That
I
I'll
don't
figure.
think we need to vote. I think we just need to comment if we want
Right.
to comment. It's optional. If you like it, leave it alone. If you don't like it, add a comment.
Yeah.
That is better.
It's not a vote.
Like that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, but you all are saying it still needs to go into a document. Is that what I hear you saying before we get to the work session?
I guess it doesn't need to be a form though. It can just be a document that then people can comment on or not.
Okay, gotcha. I think I have you. I'll follow up with questions if once I can think of what they are.
Past your bedtime.
We should probably end now.
So I'm the lucky one. I'm at my sister's house and I am going to have to leave us now.
Okay.
Okay, well, do your motion first.
Oh, I'll let Lakeisha finish. Are you
No,
finished?
I was just saying, are we ready, Dr. King and Ms. Ram, are we ready to wrap up?
So I think y'all have worked really
We're
hard
ready.
and we really appreciate you guys having us back. We look forward to next week. Next week.
Okay.
Gotta
All
start
right. Well,
this, right?
All right.
thank you. Thank you very much. And every board colleagues and Mr. Pruitt and everyone that has contributed. We are at the place of adjournment. So the floor is open. Okay.
Second.
Thank you all. See the board members tomorrow night and see you, Dr. Rain and Dr. King, next week.
Sounds
Oh,
All right, good
yes.
night.
Thanks,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Thomas. Okay, we are adjourned. I don't see any objections. We are adjourned at 9:32.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.